meeting to order and welcome everyone. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Treasury Board and Finance for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. I'd ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. I'm David Hanson, the MLA for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, and chair of this committee. We will begin starting to my right.
Good afternoon. I'm Christina Gray, the MLA for Edmonton Millwoods, and I'll be acting as deputy chair for the purpose of this committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Whitney Isaac, MLA for Calgary Glenmore.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cyril Turton, MLA for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Afternoon, Pete Guthrie, Airdrie Cochrane.
Good afternoon, Todd Lowen, MLA, Central Peace and Aldi.
Good afternoon, Shannon Phillips, MLA for Lethbridge West.
Sarah Hoffman, Edmonton Glenora.
Good afternoon, Warren Huffman, Committee Clerk.
Did you have to check your name, Warren? Okay. Okay, now we'll go to the members participating virtually. When I call your name, please introduce yourself for the record. Mr. Getson.
Shane Getson, MLA for Lexington and Parkland.
And Mr. Yassin.
Muhammad Yassin, Calgary North.
And Mr. Singh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Peter Singh, MLA Calgary East.
Thank you. Due to the current landscape we're in, all ministry staff will be participating in the estimates debate virtually. Minister, please introduce yourself for the record. Minister, can you hear me okay? Can you hear us in that room?
Is the microphone on?
It doesn't sound like they can hear me at all.
Yeah, Chair, from this end, it doesn't look like their monitor is on in their room either.
Do you want me to go over there and just tell them?
Okay, can you hear me okay, Minister? Yeah, if you could introduce yourself for the record, please.
All right, Travis Japes, Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board.
I'd like to note the following substitution for the record: Christina Gray for Joe Ceci as Deputy Chair. Before we begin, I would note that in accordance with the recommendations from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, attendees at today's meeting are advised to leave the appropriate distance between themselves and other meeting participants. In addition, as indicated in the February 25th, 2021 memo from the Honourable Speaker Cooper, I would remind everyone of committee room protocols in line with health guidelines, which require members to wear masks in committee rooms and while seated except when speaking, at which time they may choose not to wear a face covering. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meeting can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Those participating virtually are asked to turn on their camera while speaking and please mute their microphones when not speaking. Members participating virtually who wish to be placed on a speaker's list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please signal to the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Speaking rotation and time limits. Honourable members, the standing order set out the process for consideration of the main estimates. A total of 6 hours has been scheduled for consideration of the estimates for Treasury Board, Ministry of Treasury Board and Finance. For the record, I would note that the Standing Committee on Resource Stewardship has already completed 3 hours of debate in this respect. As we enter our 4th hour of debate, I will remind everyone that the speaking rotation for these meetings is provided for under Standing Order 59.01-6, and we are now at the point in the rotation where speaking times are limited to a maximum of 5 minutes for both the member and the ministry. These speaking times may be combined for a maximum of 10 minutes. Please remember to advise the chair at the beginning of your rotation if you wish to combine your time with the ministers. One final note, please remember that the discussion should flow through the chair at all times, regardless of whether or not speaking times are combined. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or message the committee clerk about the process. With the concurrence of the committee, I will call a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting. However, the 3-hour clock will continue to run. Does anyone have an opposition to a break? Seeing none, we will set that accordingly. When we adjourned this morning, we were 5 minutes into the exchange between Member Singh and the Minister. I will now invite Member Singh or another member from the Government Caucus to complete the remaining time in this rotation, and you have 5 minutes. Singh?
He's muted, I don't know if he's speaking.
Oh, here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did finish my questions. I would hand it to Member Todd Lowen.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks, Minister, for being here today. Appreciate the opportunity we have to have this discussion. On page 149 of the fiscal plan, it notes that a competitive business tax environment is crucial to attracting companies that will invest and create jobs in Alberta. So just a couple questions on that. What measures has the government taken to enhance competitiveness, and why is that so important?
Well, thank you for that question. Firstly, I'll make a couple of comments on why it's so important. Again, as we discussed this morning, creating an excellent value proposition for investors in the province of Alberta is really our goal. And there are a number of facets to that value proposition, one being a very competitive jurisdiction from a tax standpoint. So the first thing we did as a government, I think as everybody in this committee will recall, is we repealed the carbon tax. And the repeal of that tax very much improved the competitiveness of the business environment in the province. On average, that carbon tax was adding an additional $4,500 to Alberta businesses. Unfortunately, the feds have introduced a federal tax. Of course, we've challenged that in the courts. We won at the Alberta Court of Appeal, and now that issue is before the Supreme Court. The other significant move that we made was to reduce the corporate tax, business tax, income tax in this province from 12 to 8%. Initially, we planned on phasing that in over a period of time, and when after we experienced the significant economic challenges of COVID, we expedited the reduction from 10 to 8% to send a signal to capital markets, to investors across this continent and really around the world, that at a time when many jurisdictions would be looking to raise income taxes, we were going to follow through on our commitment to create a most competitive business environment. And that included a preferential business tax rate. So as I mentioned, the tax environment is one piece of a larger value proposition that includes a competitive regulatory environment. It includes a relatively low cost of living, which Alberta has right now. The McKinnon panel pointed that out, and that's a very key component to a competitive business environment. And part of that is ensuring that we can keep our personal tax proposition low. We don't have a payroll tax in this province, which is key, and we don't have a capital tax as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Just kind of to follow up on that, is how much has the job creation tax cut and the innovation employment grant cost government? Do you have any figures that you can relay there, or at least some idea what that has cost?
Well, in the current year, the acceleration from 10 points to, well, from 10% to 8% is going to cost, is going to reduce revenues by approximately $200 to $300 million. The reduction from 12 to 8% in the out years is estimated to reduce government revenues by approximately $400 million a year at this point. In terms of the Innovation Employment Grant, we're budgeting a relatively modest cost for the upcoming year, I believe in the neighborhood of $15 million in that area. And then that is increasing to approximately between 70 and I believe $80 million in the out years as businesses start to take advantage of that grant, non-refundable tax credit.
Okay, has there been any work done to figure out, how much, we see how much that would cost the government, but as far as the benefits of that and how that would relate in benefits to the government treasury and jobs.
Well, there's been a fair bit of work, econometric work done around the relationship between business taxes and economic growth and investment over the years. We certainly had very credible private sector economists that suggested that our job creation tax cut would result in over 50,000 jobs over time for the province of Alberta. That was as a result of increased investment in the province. So that was, again, one projection from
Sorry to interrupt, Minister. At this point, we'll move on to a 5-minute block for the official opposition. Would you like to combine your time with the Minister for a 10-minute block?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Ms. Phillips.
So I'd like to just start off with a few questions about the non-renewable resource forecast and budget 21, just to get a good sense of what's driving the budget. So, Minister, you provided a description of the royalty structure on page 94, and that was welcome. On page 175, the schedule of revenues. And on bitumen in particular, we don't see royalties recovering to where they were in 1920 and for the entirety of the fiscal plan until 23-24. So this was a little bit surprising, given that a substantial amount of our production should be entering into the post-payout structure. So I just want to get a little bit of a sense of what our assumptions are there. When the previous government did the royalty review, it was expected we'd start to enter into post-payout in the early 2020s. So since those assumptions were made, two things have happened. On the downside, we had curtailment, we had the crisis in the differential, and then the relatively there was a period of oil price softening in 2020, relatively short. But on the positive side, we've seen quite large reductions in per barrel costs of production. I think surprising to many people, the extent to which the cost of production has come down, and that's good. And that is a driver in the formula. So folks that we've spoken to suggest it's not quite a wash, but it's pretty close. So my first question is, what percentage of the natural resource revenue in 21, 22, and 23 comes from pre-payout and post-payout?
All right. Well, I don't have that information at my fingertips. I could certainly ask officials to look to find it. In fact, I'm getting nods here around the table. But you're absolutely correct. When oil producers reach the post-payout stage, their royalty contributions go up very, very significantly. And one thing I will say is that the big crash and energy price crash experienced last spring will have delayed some of those companies from getting to post-payout. There's no doubt about that. The other reality is, again, we've taken, I think, a very conservative, very cautious view in terms of economic assumptions leading to revenue projections. And so at $46 WTI, obviously companies will, and a $14 differential, companies will get to post-payout slower than they will with a $64 WTI price and an $11 differential. So we would love to be surprised on the upside. We just don't think that's a credible way to balance or to budget.
Thank you for that. That was helpful, just so that I can understand the role of payout, because it is changing, as you point out, Minister. So we have the economic assumptions in low and high in the fiscal plan. So do the high scenario assumptions on natural resource revenues include a change in a proportion of revenues coming from pre and post payout scenarios? Is that what is driving some of that low and high modeling?
Yes, it would. When department officials ran the modeling, they actually ran the scenarios through their models comprehensively. And so it would have impacted the post-payout periods. Also, it would have been, other economic factors would be reflected in those revenues as well.
Thank you for that. That's also helpful in terms of how we understand the low and high scenario and the interplay of those things. So I'm interested in some of how the royalty system is interplaying with and driving various aspects of the budget. So I'm wondering if officials could provide to the legislature before we vote on these estimates. This is just some basic stuff, Minister. We're just talking about technical things here. The schedule of royalty payments for each project by fiscal for the length of the fiscal plan. The expected date of when each project is meant to convert to the post-payout structure at this point in time of our understanding. And finally, the three core assumptions used by Energy and TBF to model the payout structure in each of the fiscal years under consideration in the fiscal plan. So project volumes, price, production cost, any level of that kind of technical information, if you wouldn't mind following up in writing, I think that would be appreciated.
Well, I'm certainly willing to provide as much information as we can. Some of it will necessarily need to be aggregated data, as there will be commercially sensitive data there. But I'm happy to provide as much information as we can within those confines.
And I understand those limitations, and thank you, Minister. It's more just to get a sense of how this particular economic reality in which we find ourselves is having an effect on the overall royalty structure, and therefore obviously our revenues, which you point out, and certainly is reality. A lot of our budget bottom line depends on that. I want to turn now to car insurance and just insurance in general. So we have outcome 2 of the business plan on page 109. Which states that policy and regulatory oversight for insurance that is effective, fair, and in the, the department does policy and regulatory oversight for insurance that is effective, fair, and in the interests of Albertans. So that's fine as far as it goes, but I am always keenly interested in performance metrics. So I'm wondering why the ministry doesn't have, especially automobile costs to consumers, the cost to consumers, the rate of insurance coverage as a performance metric?
Well, that's a fair question. We've not included it as a key metric. As you know, though, we have taken some action around automobile insurance with Bill 41 and regulatory reform. On a number of issues, I think the most significant move the meter issue is that our reg changes will provide clarity around the definition of a minor injury, and that definition that we're using is used in other jurisdictions, and based on feedback we've received from the industry and from our actuaries, it's expected our overall approach is expected to bring down automobile insurance premiums by $120, approximately $120 from what they would otherwise be. So we've taken action. Automobile insurance continues to certainly be a priority for us.
Minister, I heard there that maybe there was a certain enthusiasm for having a performance metric around affordability and rate of coverage. So I think my request would be that that be included in future year business plans for Albertans to be able to review and see if the government is meeting those performance metrics. And so too, so if we can, trust but verify that this reduction as a result of some of the policy changes that are made, or have been made rather, result in actual reductions. So will that performance metric be in future business plans?
Well, we certainly know, I've heard the request, and so we'll take that under advisement. The Automobile Insurance Rate Board would have those stats available, and I certainly am very interested in how the reforms we introduced last fall, how they will be affecting automobile insurance premiums.
Thank you for that. So has the ministry quantified how much automobile insurance has increased since 2019? And is that on an average cost of car insurance, an aggregate total of rate increases? Wondering if that could be, that analysis could be provided to the legislature.
Well, I think that's a reasonable request in terms of the information. I'm going to be very interested in following automobile insurance premiums again relative to the reforms that we've introduced. Recognize this, that COVID has changed driving behavior, and so that will also be factored in, no doubt, into risk profiles and automobile insurance premiums. There have been a number of insurance companies that have actually provided premium rebates to Alberta automobile insurance customers across the province. That's been welcome. But again, I'm very interested to understand how our measures have affected automobile insurance premiums going forward.
So there's publicly available information on lowestrates.ca, a report released on March 3rd, 2021 that showed the average cost of insurance for automobiles in Alberta has gone up by 36%. Does that conform, Minister, to your ministry's understanding of the rate of increase?
I apologize again for interrupting. It's going to happen quite often every 10 minutes here, so we'll have to get used to it, and I do apologize for it, but it is part of the protocol. We will now move over to the government caucus for 5 minutes. Do you wish to combine with the minister for a full 10-minute?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lowen.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll just move on from my last question there. Taxpayer-supported debt outstanding is estimated to total $98.3 billion at the end of 2021 and $115.8 billion at the end of 21-22, as noted on page 165 of the fiscal plan. And why are these estimates so much higher than what was estimated in budget 2020, which was $21.4 billion and $32.9 billion respectively?
All right, good. Well, thank you. I would suggest that the taxpayer-supported debt in budget 2020 was higher than the number you quoted, but nonetheless, there's no doubt that taxpayer-supported debt projections are much higher than they were in budget 2020, and that's as a result of increased borrowing requirements. Again, largely due to the significant drop in revenues that the provincial government experienced in 2020, and of course we're projecting a modest recovery year over year for the term of the fiscal plan, which is resulting in increased borrowing over and above what we expected in budget 2020. And so just to identify that data, in budget 2020, we projected to need to borrow just under $16 billion, and with refinancing, we in fact are required to borrow just under $28 billion. And again, that's due to a complete collapse in revenues as a result of the energy price crash and the pandemic, and to some degree, a lesser degree, but to some degree, a requirement to roll out some relief programs and certainly finance healthcare to deal with the pandemic. And this has also supported our enhanced capital plan.
Okay, thank you very much. And what is the plan on reducing debt and deficit without raising taxes?
So that's a great question, and so there are going to be that points me back to our fiscal anchors. Again, this government brought forward, I believe, a very credible plan in budget 2019 to balance the budget in this term. COVID has interrupted that plan. But we've identified, again, a few key fiscal anchors. The first one, to keep our net debt to GDP ratio below 30%. That's going to be critical to ensure that we maintain a reasonably strong balance sheet as we get past the pandemic. The second fiscal anchor, to align our government spending on a per capita basis, cost of delivering services on a per capita basis with that of other provinces. That is going to be critical to a critical goal to put this province on a sustainable fiscal trajectory. That's really almost job number one in ensuring that a sustainable fiscal trajectory. And of course, the third fiscal anchor is that when we do get past the pandemic, when we have additional economic clarity, then of course we will provide a timeline and path to balance. Economic recovery will be absolutely critical as well in terms of getting this province on a sustainable fiscal trajectory. And that's why so much in Budget 2021 is in fact coordinated, earmarked, and designed to fund economic recovery in the province.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn my time over now to MLA Turton. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister, for obviously being here this afternoon. So I have a number of questions I'd like to ask you to kind of kickstart us off for this next section, specifically involving red tape reduction. And to kind of, I know Member Singh asked a question, and I'd like to, regarding red tape, and I'd like to continue on his train of thought. So on page 109 of the 2021 to 2024 Ministry Business Plan, your ministry has included Objective 1.1, which is to lead the government's red tape reduction efforts to remove unnecessary regulatory and administrative burdens on Albertans and businesses that exist here in the province, and to do so while maintaining consumer, environmental, and health and safety protections and fiscal accountability. So I guess a couple questions regarding Objective 1.1 and your ministry's operations to reduce red tape. So on the first point, or the first question, is on page 109. Your ministry mentions that it will be allocating $2.4 million to corporate planning and red tape reduction. How has this been allocated to ensure that the department is successful and operates responsibly within its mandate?
Well, red tape reduction, regulatory modernization is an absolute critical goal, and it's a critical goal in positioning this province for economic growth and recovery. Those funds will be used to ensure that the red tape reduction effort is adequately resourced. We will also be working with industry advisory committees around red tape reduction. That's going to be a very important part of the effort, and that's one reason why we can keep our costs relatively low for this very important initiative. I certainly continue to be of the belief that in so many ways government rarely knows best, and if we're going to truly modernize our regulatory system to improve our competitiveness, we will have to take advice from those on the front lines, from those in the pertinent industry sectors that deal with the regulatory environment every day. And that's why our Minister of Red Tape Reduction has in fact appointed a whole series of industry panels, advisory panels around red tape reduction. The Associate Minister meets with those panels reasonably regularly, and they've identified a number of red tape reduction initiatives. Many of those have been actioned, and work is being conducted.
Excellent. Thank you for the answer, Minister. Obviously, a lot of residents of Spruce Grove and Stony Plain, when it comes, the discussion of red tape comes up, there's always the concern that, red tape might be cut, placing certain programs at risk, or some type of regulatory systems in place, and affect them negatively, which could obviously affect residents both in my riding and I guess around the province. So I guess my question to you is, how does your department determine what sort of red tape is to be reduced, first of all, and what sort of evaluation or collaboration need to be pursued to guarantee that this reduction doesn't inadvertently affect that regulation or process negatively, which would obviously affect families in my riding?
Well, sure. Appreciate that question. Government has a very important responsibility to provide protection for individuals, certainly for the environment in this province. We have a great responsibility there, but we also have a responsibility to do that in by the most efficient means. And I would argue provide adequate protection that Albertans expect with the lightest touch. And that's really the baseline premise for regulatory reform and red tape reduction. Ultimately, if, in my view, and I know that this is shared by the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction, if a regulation is not serving a material purpose, it should no longer exist. If it is serving a material purpose, and many do, a robust regulatory environment is critically important, then that regulation, if it does serve a material purpose, needs to be implemented and structured in such a way to have a minimal effect on the freedom of Albertans and on the ability for businesses to operate nimbly and without additional government cost and burden.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have? Okay, excellent. So I was just hoping, Minister, perhaps you can just elaborate a little bit further in terms of the process that the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction goes through when they are busy evaluating if red tape is redundant or if it is, or if it's actually still needed to ensure, that Albertans are protected in whatever ministry it is. Obviously, it's a broad portfolio. It has yourself and the Associate Minister of Red Tape looking at all different ministries. So perhaps just maybe clarify a little bit about how you go about that decision process to make sure that, the appropriate red tape gets cut.
Well, again, the minister does rely on industry panels to identify appropriate regulations and regulatory burden to consider. At that point, the Associate Minister will work with affected ministries, and they will do some additional analysis. They'll determine and ensure that those very pertinent issues that the regulations were designed to protect, that protection continues.
Thank you, Minister. We will now move back over to the official opposition for 10 minutes. You want to go back and forth with the Minister?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you for a 10-minute block. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks so much, colleagues. And while I was in health this morning, I hope my questions aren't redundant. If they are, I am apologizing for that, but I want to make sure that I can be in as many different estimates as possible and represent some of the concerns and questions that have been asked. I want to very briefly comment, and then I'm going to get back to the thread that Member Phillips was on, around the government rarely knows best piece. I would say teachers that I hear from very regularly about their pensions feel very strongly that that is the case when it comes to their pension, and that they would appreciate if the government would give the same kind of consideration in consulting and engaging with, I believe the minister said, folks on the front lines when it comes to their own pension management, as he's referring to when it comes to red tape reduction. So with that comment on the record, I'd be happy to hear the minister respond. Member Phillips highlighted that since government changed, according to lowestrates.ca, insurance, automobile insurance here in the province of Alberta has gone up 36%. Can the minister confirm?
No, I certainly can't confirm that number. The weighted average increase based on our statistics between November 2019 and October 2020 was 11.4%. So, and anecdotally, it appears that rate increases have really started to level off since then. In fact, there's been a number of companies that have provided automobile insurance premium rebates to customers since then. So, no, I don't agree with the 24% based on our data.
36 actually, but thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. So definitely we hear regularly from Albertans who talk about driving less, parking their vehicles more, and their rates continuing to go up. So I think having it back to at the very beginning when the government chose to eliminate the rate cap would be a helpful analysis, because it's definitely had an impact, and I understand the minister wants to measure impacts going forward, and I think that's fair, but I think it's also important to know what's happened since the government came into office and started removing the rate caps that were in place before. So if further analysis is going to be done, and if it could be tabled in the House, I think that would provide greater certainty to all Albertans on what the actual hard facts are for everyone. So in terms of auto insurance, continuing on that outcome too, as it is in the business plan, has the ministry forecast what expected changes to automobile insurance rates will be as a result of the legislative changes that were brought in this last fall? And the expert panel report in October of 2020 forecast that the approximate average decrease could be 10% in annual premiums. Is this in line with the ministry's current expectations? And if not, why not?
Yes, with our expectations based on, again, our actuaries' work, as well as the automobile insurance industry, confirmation. We expect that the adjustments that we made, both regulatory and legislative adjustments, will result in premiums dropping by over $120 per vehicle per year. Now, that's from where they would have otherwise been. We'll be monitoring that closely. I really believe that it's also our role to ensure that we remove barriers in this province for insurance companies to come in and compete. And based on what I've seen, we have active competition in the province of Alberta. That's essential to ensure that consumers are provided good value. Here's the problem with the rate cap, and we were observing it. In a competitive environment with a rate cap in place, over time, as companies start to lose money, they simply start to pull back product offerings in a market. We were observing that in the automobile insurance market in this province. A rate cap would have ultimately disintegrated the automobile insurance industry provincially, and that would have been unacceptable, as Alberta consumers simply wouldn't have had an option. And that would have eventually led to very significant premiums because we would have had fewer players in the market, creating a lack of competition. So what we've done...
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, if possible. I think you did answer my question about a minute ago, and I appreciate what you have to say on other topics, but our time is so precious. I'd appreciate if we could keep it focused on the questions at hand, if possible. So I'll go to my next one, and as it relates to insurance for other sectors as well. You've probably heard from school divisions, as I have, about the significant increases that they've experienced to their insurance for their own school divisions. And I know that there was talk about maybe making some changes, but the only change I know to date is that school boards were authorized to use some of their capital allowance to pay for the insurance instead of paying for windows or boilers or those types of things, or they were allowed to spend money that they had in savings. So is the Treasury Board and Finance doing anything to actually address the significant increase that school divisions felt on their insurance rates last year?
Well, we certainly recognize that there has been upward pressure on property insurance premiums over the last really a number of years in Alberta. We have in this province what insurance experts describe as a hard market. There's been from pretty significant weather events and other events in the province that have created some losses for insurers. And that's not only here in Alberta. Actually, that's been experienced across the country, and you know, some I think would argue that even globally, many jurisdictions are experiencing a hard insurance market. And so, our role is to ensure that we have a very competitive environment in the province, that we have very few barriers to entry, so insurance companies can come in and offer their product offerings. And I also know that it has paid to shop around in this province relative to insurance premiums. There have been a couple of things that we've done. Certainly, one thing we've done with respect to condo insurance, we have eliminated the best price practice.
Sorry, Minister. I appreciate that there's a whole bunch of insurance things you want to talk about. I want to talk specifically about the issues that school divisions have experienced, because that's money coming out of the classrooms that could be spent on education, and it's an issue with the insurance. And a big piece of it is the lack of options when it comes to insurance or a government-run program. So does the Minister have anything in this budget as it relates to insurance and affordability for school divisions?
Again, we have worked with the Education Department with respect to ensuring that school boards can all procure insurance, number one. I know that there were some school boards that were challenged in even procuring property insurance. And I know that there was a satisfactory outcome at the start of this year, which was critically important, so that school boards could open their doors and know that they would be covered if they experienced any losses.
So no changes through budget or through policy in this budget as it relates to affordability for school divisions for a long-term strategy to be able to make their insurance affordable and accessible. That the quick fix that was done in the fall was temporary. Is that not true?
Yes, the provisions were in our current fiscal year, and they're not. There is not additional. There is not an additional requirement in the upcoming budget year.
Divisions should expect that their insurance rates that they have to start from scratch again, essentially, that there's nothing being done this year to make their insurance more affordable for the upcoming school year? I think that's being asked and answered, unless you have a different answer. Okay.
School boards. Chair, can I speak here? School boards can know that we will continue to work with them on their insurance challenges. We'll be there for them, and we will work shoulder to shoulder to provide solutions as required.
Okay. Thanks, Minister. I think we have about a minute left, so I'd like to go back to the auto insurance piece. So I believe you said that it would be 10% lower than what it would be otherwise, and I'm assuming that means than what it would be with fewer regulations. So will it actually be 10% lower than it is today? Can Alberta ratepayers expect that their auto insurance is going to go down today, or is it going down from what it would have been in a disaster case scenario? So it's actually going up. I think that's the question most people ask me, is what's my insurance going to be next month? Because it keeps going up.
Sure, and I think as members would know, there are a number of factors that affect our risk profiles and ultimately automobile insurance premiums. So what our actuaries have concluded, and the insurance industry has confirmed, is that automobile insurance premiums are expected to go down by approximately $120, which is almost 10% on average from where they would have otherwise been. Here's the nuance there. COVID has changed the scenario. The reality is, as the member pointed out, in some cases people are driving less. In some cases they're parking a vehicle. There's been less activity, and that's resulted in insurance companies.
Again, sorry to interrupt, Minister. I have to, but quickly, we will take a health break as close to 5 o'clock as possible, depending on the speaking order, whenever it comes up. But just like to address an issue that we're having we can't have speakers on in both rooms because we get a pile of feedback. So please bear with us. This is unprecedented. We're doing our best, but we'll try our best to make sure that everybody has the time to ask the questions and answer the questions as well as possible. So we'll now move on to a 10-minute rotation for the government caucus. I assume you want a 10-minute back and forth with?
Yes, please, Mr.
Go ahead, Mr. Turton.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, Minister. Just to continue on some of the questions I was asking in the last block, specifically regarding red tape reduction. And yeah, so I guess my last question on this point is on performance metric 1A. It's found on page 109 of the business plan. It provides us with the information that Treasury Board and Finance has reduced red tape by 2.97% in 2019-2020. Can you, Minister, please provide this committee with more information as to what some of these reductions were and what plans of the ministry has in the future to cut more?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, the first thing we did was, of course, repeal the carbon tax. And so from Treasury Board and Finance's standpoint, that was a significant red tape reduction and a red tape reduction effort that made a very, very significant and positive impact for all Albertans and Alberta businesses. In terms of the count, we had made modest progress, let's call it that, in our first year, and we've doubled down on our red tape reduction efforts. So right now, in fact, we've reduced red tape in the Ministry of Treasury Board and Finance by 13.5%, exceeding government's target of 12% by the end of this fiscal year. So we've made great progress, and I want to thank my officials for that. They've really doubled down on red tape reduction efforts. I want to thank our folks and partners at AGLC. They have really made great progress, and in fact, AGLC, I believe, are to about the 23% mark right now, and so that's been tremendous progress. We're on track as a ministry to meet our target by the end of this term. And at this point in time, we are ahead of schedule.
Excellent. That's fantastic to hear. At this point, I'd like to move the rest of my time over to Mr. Yassin to continue. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. And red tape reduction has been an integral part of our government's effort to deliver services more efficiently and more effectively. And I will kind of continue on, much like Member Turton, on that topic. My question is directed towards red tape reduction initiatives, more specifically key objective 2.1 mentioned on outcome 2 of the business plan on page 109 again. And the question is, how has the ministry approached to its review of the Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Act, the sporting regulations and the AGLC handbook?
All right, well, that's a great question, and I will turn it over just shortly to Candace from AGLC, who's here with us today. But I will say that AGLC has made great progress overall on red tape reduction, and there's also been some very key changes that have assisted Alberta businesses, small businesses, particularly restaurants, who had their operations severely curtailed due to public health measures. There were some changes that assisted them. One of the most significant changes was allowing restaurants to offer liquor sales as part of their off-site food delivery. That I've heard from many restaurants that was really key, critical, and in fact, I believe that in some cases that made the difference between the restaurant continuing and not. And so I will ask Candace to make a few comments from AGLC just around the greater effort of red tape reduction. It's been significant.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Minister. My name is Candace Machado. I'm the acting president and CEO at AGLC. And yes, we've had considerable effort in the past year on red tape reduction, reviewing all of our handbooks and seeking opportunities to enable private sector and make it easier to do business with AGLC. Many of those have impacted restaurants, bars, liquor stores, and our gaming operations. And so we continue looking at all of our handbooks with that lens. We've achieved a 24 or 23% reduction as highlighted, and we're on track to achieve the 33% before the end of this fiscal year, next fiscal year. Any other specific questions on that?
No, I think you have answered the question. Even you have already got into my second question, so I will pass on to Member Guthrie.
Thank you. Just wanted to go back to this topic that was discussed just a little earlier in this session. It was brought up around the $46 average WTI forecasted price. And Minister, in the 2021 budget and today as well, you've spent a great deal of time talking about the three pillars, one of which being a future path to balance. And, obviously we must get through COVID before putting forward a reliable path to that balance. But, with that in mind, and, I'm not going to hold you to it, but, we have very strong oil and gas prices right now. And just as a rule of thumb, and maybe your thoughts around this, what can you tell us about what a $1 increase in oil prices might mean above the $46 forecast? What would that mean for the Treasury? And what would, say, a 10-cent increase in gas prices mean? So, as far as looking to Albertans in the future and strengthening and supporting those pillars that you were talking about.
Well, that's a great question. And because of the amount of economic uncertainty we're dealing with right now, we did create a high and a low scenario for Albertans in budget 2021. And there is significant sensitivity to energy price fluctuation. In fact, for every dollar change in WTI, the effect on the fisc is about $230 million, which is really significant. But one thing to keep in mind is there's an interrelationship with WTI prices, certainly our differential, which would indicate the price for Western Canadian Select prices. And also because the Canadian economy and trade flows are so remain dependent on the energy sector, we continue to have, well, what some might call a petrobuck. And so when we see significant fluctuations, actually even not significant fluctuations, but simply changes in energy prices, it does affect our currency. And so there is an interrelationship there as well. So in terms of the price effect, the fiscal effect on our revenue with Western Canadian Select, a dollar change there has an effect on the fisc of something like just under $200 million. I think, in fact, it's $185 million. For every cent change in our currency, it affects the fisc by $165 million. So again, there's a very significant impact, and there's an interrelationship there. Again, our high and low scenarios were run through our department modeling, and that recognizes the impact, that interrelationship impact. Now, in terms of natural gas prices, for every 10-cent move in the Alberta reference price, and the Alberta reference price is a combination, basically combination of the AECO price and the Henry Hub price. But for every 10-cent move there's a $20 million effect to government revenues. So as you point out, as the member points out, Chair, there is a very elastic effect, very sensitive effect on government revenues with minor changes in energy prices. And that's why we determined it was important to be transparent with Albertans on both a low and a high scenario.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you very much for that. And I could certainly understand, why you guys, decided to use $46 as a baseline. The last 5 years or 6 years actually has been so volatile. We've seeing negative oil prices along that path. I think that was prudent. I'll shift gears here and go to key objective 2.2 of the Treasury Board and Finance business plan, found on page 110. And it is to support Alberta businesses.
Sorry, Mr. Guthrie, to interrupt. We'll now move on to the official opposition for, I assume, a 10-minute back and forth.
Yes, but will be Member Gray.
Jump in, thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Gray.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be joining the estimates here today. Minister, I would love to ask you some questions about the Alberta Jobs Now program listed in your fiscal plan. The federal government announced $185 million for Alberta Jobs on December 16th of 2020. While I will note that your government did not put out any announcements on that. On page 98 of the fiscal plan, as well as in media and in the budget highlights, the government is talking about $136 million over 3 years for the Alberta Jobs Now program. So I'm just curious why the government is announcing less than that $185 million. Why is $136 being shared?
I'm sorry, Chair. I was a bit distracted. Could I ask the member just to repeat the actual question? I think I caught all the preamble, but then I missed the question. Apologize.
Yes. So the question is, why, when the federal government announced $185 million for this program, is your government, through the fiscal plan, advertising or celebrating $136 million over 3 years for the Alberta Jobs Now program?
All right. Well, good. Thank you for that. In terms of profiling the program, that again, this is a program that has just been announced. It is a program that utilizes federal funds and also has a provincial component to the funding. And it's a program that will be rolled out, and I believe will be very instrumental in improving the skill set for thousands of Albertans, and will also assist employers in ensuring that they can obtain the right talent to ensure that they are competitive and successful going forward.
Thank you, Minister. As a follow-up, you did not answer why the government is talking about 136 million and not 185. And secondly, reading the federal announcement, there is no provincial component to this funding that is available from the publicly available documentation. This is very different from the critical worker benefit, where there was a provincial component. My understanding is this is a continuation of the Labour Market Development Agreement funds, and straight flow through dollars to create jobs for Albertans. So why, when the federal government is giving Alberta 185 million to create jobs through an existing program, is your government only talking about 136 million?
So over some years. So firstly, Chair, to the member, we will provide some additional detail so that the member has the profiling for the full fiscal plan with respect to Jobs Now. This again is a plan that utilizes federal funding in part and is also funded by the province. Again, and we view this as a critically important plan. A plan that will ensure that Albertans can upgrade their skills and also position employers to attract the right kind of talent and, in fact, grow the talent within their organization.
Thank you very much, Minister. The provincial government has allocated at most 4.5 million to this critically important plan, where the federal government has allocated 185 million. So what you define as critical importance doesn't seem to be very much money when we're talking about the provincial component. I'm very curious about the 136 million, and I hope perhaps we might be able to get an answer to that. I'm also curious about over 3 years, because the federal government, and on your fiscal plan, page 85, makes clear that this was money intended to be spent now, immediately, using existing programs from Labour Market Development. On page 85, it reads that the profiling, the moving of over 65% of the money into fiscal 2021-22, rather than using in fiscal 2020, was subject to federal approval because the intent was only to be able to reprofile 20%. The Alberta government is asking to reprofile over 65%. So I'll just break that down into two questions. Why are you advertising across 3 years when obviously the federal government program is intended to use this money immediately? And secondly, have you received the approval from the federal government to reprofile such a large amount when it appears they intended that money to be spent over this past quarter?
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the BEST program would actually align the funding and program availability with employers as the economy starts to improve. In the event we rolled this funding out as the economy is being really, really challenged due to COVID, employers would have a very difficult time utilizing it because there simply wouldn't be opportunity. You can't create a job by simply just providing the training. There has to be an opportunity for an employer to be able to place an Albertan who needs a skills upgrade. So I think the timing of the rollout is actually going to coincide very well with our recovery from COVID and the great economic challenge. And in fact, it will ensure that employers, as they take a look and see opportunities in the future, it will ensure that employers can step out and hire Albertans who wouldn't otherwise be employed and allow them to upgrade their skills, which will create a win-win for both the employer and employees.
Thank you, Minister. A lot of hopes and dreams for this program, which has not yet been announced. But again, I will ask, has the federal government, who is putting up $185 million, approved Alberta's request to reprofile up over 65% into next year? And if they have not, why are you advertising over 3 years? What are the chances they're going to let you reprofile more again?
We're certainly working with other provinces who are joining us in advocacy of the federal government to provide sufficient flexibility so that this program can actually deliver on its intended goals, and that is ensure that Canadians across the country can upgrade their skills and employers can be positioned for economic recovery.
Okay, thank you, Minister. If you or your officials are able to respond in writing to some of these questions, given more time to look at the details, that would be appreciated. You currently are booking $62 million to go out the door this year. That is in the 2020 budget. $62 million, today's date is March 9th. Are you going to be able to get $62 million into the hands of employers by the end of this month?
Well, that would be a good job, or a good question, of course, for Labour as they're working forward to deliver this program as soon as they can. At the time that we drafted the budget, of course, we determined based on the best information we have at that time what we will allocate in terms of funding for each fiscal year. And I think, Chair, the member can be rest assured that if that program is delayed because the federal government is slow to provide necessary flexibility, then that program will be available for the following fiscal year.
Minister, it's clear in the federal announcement, given there is no provincial announcement, that the intent of this program was to build on the strong delivery networks already in place in Alberta. We have, through the labour market development agreements, amazing programs, workforce training programs, particularly through the Labour Ministry. I would suggest if there's been a delay, it may be because your government is trying to invent a new way to get this money out to employers rather than using the systems that we already have and getting it out as quickly as possible to the Albertans who need it immediately. Calling into question the naming of the program, which is Alberta Jobs Now, because right now it's delayed. And I understand that you will try to pin that on the federal government, but I would suggest there may be other factors involved. Do you know how many full-time employees will be involved in administering this Alberta Jobs Later program?
There will be some additional hires required to administer this program. I don't have the actual number available to me, but it will involve staffing up at Labour.
And are you aware of, so just as part of that FTEs, what the administration costs may be to do with administering this program?
There will be additional costs, obviously, required to administer the program.
Sorry to interrupt again, Minister. We will now move on to what I assume is a 10-minute block back and forth with the Government Caucus. Mr. Guthrie, have I assumed correctly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we were just getting started there, Minister, on key objective 2.2 of the Treasury Board and Finance Business Plan. It was on page 110. Says that it's to support Alberta businesses by encouraging investments and improving access to capital with a flexible and responsive regulatory framework. So it's a bit of a mouthful there, but I was wondering if we could unpack that a bit. So first question in this regard then is, how does the ministry ensure that the regulatory framework provided here does stay flexible and responsive, and it does promote growth rather than just creating a regulatory burden, something that may hinder growth?
Well, that's a great question, and the efficient function of capital markets is critical to the efficient function of an economy, and it will be critical to economic recovery as we seek to see maximum capital deployed in the province of Alberta. And so there's going to be, firstly, there are ongoing initiatives through the Alberta Securities Commission on ongoing regulatory review, and that work continues now. So stay tuned. We will be bringing forward some additional regulatory, red tape reduction items, regulatory and legislative changes very, very soon that will, in fact, improve the efficiency of capital markets function. A part of our effort as well will be tied to our financial services sector strategy, as we're going to, again, be working with the ASC and working with an advisory committee that we'll be appointing quite soon on considering and moving forward with what's called a regulatory sandbox approach, and that is to provide an environment here, an opportunity in the province of Alberta for innovators in the fintech space to offer limited product offerings under the very high-level regulatory oversight of regulators in the province, but offer product offerings for which there's not definitive regulatory framework in place. I've certainly been advised that if we could offer that kind of opportunity in the province, it would attract innovators. It would spur on additional tech advancements and also likely attract additional investment into that space in the province. And so that will be part of our fintech strategy. Again, we'll be working with experts in the finance and fintechs fields on structuring that. We'll be working closely with the Alberta Securities Commission as well.
Okay, excellent. Actually, you've answered my next question for me here on encouraging investment and that access to capital. So thank you very much. Coming out of COVID-19, job creation is going to be paramount. So how does this framework create opportunities and contribute to job opportunities for Albertans?
Well, as I mentioned, access to capital is a key ingredient for businesses to start and for businesses to grow. And so efficient capital markets are critical to that exercise. And that's why we're focused on reducing red tape and modernizing our capital markets regulatory environment here in the province.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, I'd like to cede my time to MLA Getson.
Go ahead, Mr. Getson, are you online?
I sure am, Chair, and I'm clicking buttons as feverishly as I can to get caught up here.
Very good. Go ahead, sir.
So thank you, Minister, for that. So the central banks around the world, they supported us both through the 2008 recession and currently now. And we've been very fortunate. There's been some record low interest rates. And history does show us that these, interest rates do recover once the economy start to strengthen. So with that, on page 165 of the fiscal plan, the government shows a large amount of debt maturing in that second half of the decade. How would the increasing interest rates affect the government of Alberta and all of its debt and refinancing at the higher interest rates, sir?
Well, higher interest rates are going to be a risk for every government, every jurisdiction coming out of COVID. I think you'll go a long ways to find a government that hasn't had to borrow funds over and above what they had intended to because of the great economic challenges of the pandemic. And so, as you point out, there's right now we are in a period of time, really a period of historically low interest rates, and so the province of Alberta going forward will have additional interest rate risk that would be reflected in increased debt service costs. And that's why, Chair, it is so absolutely essential that we hold fast to our fiscal anchors. Ensure that coming out of this pandemic that we've maintained a reasonably strong balance sheet. Ensuring that, in fact, we've brought our spending in line to deliver government services at least as efficiently as other provinces. And that's why it's going to be critically important for us to lay out a timeline and a fresh path to balance. Because, again, Alberta will have interest rate risk, debt service cost risk that obviously would be exacerbated by increasing rates. And right now, we're hearing from economists that, going forward, they're expecting economies to perhaps recover quicker than they might have otherwise predicted. There's been significant fiscal stimulus by governments, certainly in the Western world, and with central bank practices. around quantitative easing and around bond purchase programs. That combination with significant fiscal stimulus could put some pressure on inflation in upcoming periods, which could push central bankers to push up interest rates. That's why it's so important that we continue to focus on fiscal responsibility, on efficient delivery of government services, and ensuring we maintain a strong balance sheet.
I appreciate that, Minister. And you did touch on it a bit, but what are some of the metrics that we're going to be using, or guideposts, if you, as it were, to ensuring that our government's budget returns to sustainable path once the pandemic's over?
And really, I've mentioned those, and that is ensuring that our net debt as a percentage of our GDP stays below 30%. Again, that ratio is important because it really, there's a strong correlation between that ratio and a jurisdiction's entity's ability to service its debt. So that one's going to be critical. And again, as I mentioned, our cost per capita of delivering government services needs to get into line with other provinces. I've said this before, but it's never been more pertinent than it is today. Alberta can no longer afford to be an outlier in the way we spend money. We have to ensure that we're delivering most efficiently to Albertans and most respectfully to Alberta taxpayers.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Minister. And with respect, I'm going to point out the blatantly obvious. We have a deficit that's pushing over $18 billion, and obviously we need to control the cost to do that. But we also need our revenue to rebound so we can, bring in that cash flow. And the reduction we experienced was because of COVID and drop in oil prices. And you've mentioned before the triple, swan event, the black swan event. Page 150 of the fiscal plan talks about the job creation tax cut, which was to accelerate in the summer of 2020. So with that, what is the estimated difference in the revenue because of that acceleration? What are we seeing for positive trends or anticipated?
Well, that's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, we're expecting revenues to be affected by between $200 and $300 million this year as a result of the accelerated rate reduction from 10 to 8%. And we really are, we're starting to see our value proposition in this province. The fact that we have, that we've really created a very competitive business environment. We're starting to see that take hold. We've seen mCloud Technologies announce that they're moving their head office from Vancouver to Calgary. Very, very positive. Infosys has decided to set up shop in Calgary in a very significant way, creating 500 job opportunities, certainly renting a significant amount of commercial space, and they have plans to grow beyond that. In 2020, we landed record levels of venture capital in this province. In fact, I believe for the city of Calgary and maybe Edmonton as well.
Again, my apologies for interrupting, Minister. We'll now move on to the official opposition for a 5 and 5.
I would love that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Gray.
Thank you very much, Minister. Minister, I'd still like to talk about the Alberta Jobs Now program. And I wonder if you might not have had officials had enough time to be able to answer some of those questions I started off with. So I'll just ask again, do you know how much will be spent on administration costs for the Alberta Jobs Now program, which is yet to be announced?
So, sure, and I have to thank officials because they were able to gather that information. Our expectation, our budget is that for the current fiscal year that we're in right now, in the event they're able to deal with grant applications and the funding will be $60 million relative to the applications, there will be a $2 million cost of administration. For the following fiscal year, 21-22. There will be we're expecting $120 million in terms of program funding, and the administrative cost will be $7.5 million. There will be some additional admin costs as well in the out years, as there will be some cost of compliance related to this program.
Thank you very much, Minister. That's quite helpful in trying to understand why you were advertising $136 million across 3 years. I had supposed that perhaps 25% was being booked for administration, but you're telling me that is not the case. You won't be taking 25% for administration of this important program.
That is not the case, Chair. That would be a grossly inefficient program, one that would be unacceptable to this government, as well as I'm sure to the member.
I was very surprised when I thought that might be the answer, so I'm glad that's not the answer. Were you able to find out why you were advertising $136 million and not $185?
Well, the reality is this program will be delivered over 2 years. And so it is going to be fully funded over those 2 years. And I believe the total cost of the program will be just under $200 million over those 2 fiscal years.
Thank you. Now, this program announced by the federal government in mid-December, the provincial government has decided to call it Alberta Jobs Now. My understanding is this is intended to be immediate fiscal help for the provinces to be able to get people back to work, to inject some stimulus into the economy, a significant amount. But your government has not yet announced the program, has not started creating those jobs yet. I will say that I see parallels to the critical worker benefit, where you left significant amounts of money on the table in Ottawa for 9 months, costing our Alberta economy, as verified by credible economists. Will your government be prioritizing getting this money out and helping to create jobs for Albertans immediately, other than titling the program Alberta Jobs Now?
So a couple of things. In terms of the critical worker benefit, we've not left any money on the table. At the end of the day, we anticipate utilizing all the federal funds in that program. And given the fact that the second wave hit us last fall, the fact that we kept our powder dry, I think, turned out to be a responsible decision. So we're expecting to fully use federal funding in the critical worker program. And again, as I mentioned on the Jobs Now program, to roll that program out in the middle of one of perhaps the largest economic contractions since the Great Depression would have actually been irresponsible as well. It will do far more good as we align that program timing with economic recovery at a time when employers actually have some opportunity to add staff. At that point in time, employers will be able to reach out, hire Albertans who are sidelined likely right now due to the pandemic, due to the economic collapse, and bring them on board them and train them on the job. We know that so much training, excellent training, takes place on the job. This program will afford that.
Thank you, Minister. And to be clear, I acknowledge that you did spend the critical worker benefit money, but it took over 280 days to announce the program and to get it out the door. And that did impact Alberta. And that did, to say that the program now released has been better because of the delay on behalf of taxi workers, the people who clean childcare centers, on behalf of hundreds of different types of employees who've reached out to me. I would say that your program, despite having 9 months to be designed, still had significant flaws. That being said, I'll ask you a final question about this Alberta Jobs Later program, which is how many jobs do you think 185 million will create here in Alberta?
When the minister announces the program, I expect the minister will have something to say around job volume and their expectations in terms of job creation. I don't have that information here.
Fair enough. I apologize. I do have one final question, which is, if your intent is to get the 60 million out this year, do you anticipate the minister will be announcing this program before the year ends? The fiscal year, I mean.
In order to get the program funding out before this fiscal year would require the minister to announce the program before the end of the fiscal year. So the answer is yes.
Wonderful. I look forward to that announcement. I'd like to switch into public sector compensation and public sector bargaining. Within your fiscal plan on page 122, you have announced that the size of the public service will be reduced by 7.7%, and the total compensation bill for the government of Alberta is forecast to decrease by $560 million between now and 2023. Can you tell us how much of this decrease in total compensation will need to come out of bargaining?
No, I'm not prepared to say that right now. As the chair, as the member would know, public sector cost is a function of price times volume. One thing I will point out is that the McKinnon panel concluded that, again, Alberta was an outlier in terms of our costs, public sector costs. Alberta, on a per capita basis, spends just under $5,500 a year per person in Alberta. And in British Columbia, for instance, the number is just over $4,800 a year. That's a delta of about $635, which, if you extrapolate that against the population of Alberta, that's about $2.8 billion. Again, Alberta can no longer afford to be an outlier. And so we're looking to thoughtfully and compassionately right-size the public sector in this province as well. We will need to ensure that our public sector remuneration costs are aligned with those of comparable provinces.
Minister, on fiscal plan page 122, just related to public sector compensation, I'd like to connect that to a briefing note that we received through Freedom of Information that was originally drafted for you in September of 2019, where you were being briefed that a legislated mandate model for public sector bargaining would, quote, not be ready in time for the 2020 bargaining round. Is your legislated mandate model for public sector bargaining ready now? And is that part of what's driving assumptions in the fiscal plan?
Chair, our goal is to negotiate cooperatively and successfully with our public sector union partners. That's our goal, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to achieve a mutually beneficial outcome. An outcome that can ensure a sustainable fiscal trajectory for the province of Alberta, an outcome that's fair for our hardworking public sector workers, and an outcome that will also ensure the sustainability of those programs that they deliver.
Thank you, Minister. I will suggest that, having talked to many of the frontline workers who you are thanking, that they do not at this point feel appreciated, respected, or that they can trust for a fair outcome. Along those lines, I would simply like to follow up that briefing note that we obtained, prepared for you, has parts of it that are redacted. Using that term legislated mandate model of bargaining legislation, which was characterized as being under consideration by the government, can you confirm that you've been briefed that such legislation is in fact unconstitutional?
Right now, again, we are looking forward to a successful, mutually beneficial, agreed upon settlement with our public sector partners. And that's what I can state unequivocally right now. I'm very hopeful that we can achieve agreement, and again, one that will ensure fiscal sustainability for the province, sustainability of our programming.
Sorry, thank you again, Minister, for your input. We will now move on to a 5-minute block with the Government Caucus, and I assume you want to go back and forth to make it a 10-minute block, very closely followed by a 5-minute health break. So going to the Government Caucus, Mr. Turton? Or are we back to
Getson's
Mr.
still
Getson?
up.
Okay.
That's okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Getson.
Perfect, Minister, and got cut off a little bit short there. I apologize. I get a little bit long-winded, get excited when it comes to interest rates and how some of the impacts are there. So back in that vein itself, we were talking about some of the job creation tax cut, some of the corporate items that we have that are taking place, and some of the interest. And obviously, you know, Infosys has been talked about a couple times here, both by the members opposite and ourselves. However, you know, I want to offer you some feedback from the folks that I talk to, and I hear about that. The tax may not be in whole by itself the reason that it comes here. I'll concede that to the opposition members. We do have a strong resource pool. We have a ton of transferable skill sets. If you look at the energy sector, of 80% of those transferable skill sets we built up over the years for the quality assurance, the engineering, the acumen. It all transfers over to either the aerospace, aviation, or even in so much as that coding world. You know, as much as I'm on the teleconference this morning with a company down in Calgary that exports that technology around the world by having 3D modeling and doing those type of things that they can, you know, do clash detections and otherwise. And this is a small Alberta company that's built on innovation from that energy sector that is going into all those environments. So with that, Minister, if you could talk a little bit what you're hearing as well on not only on the skill sets that we have, the livability that we have in our province, but I will rest assured with you, sir, the feedback I've had also, those corporate tax savings are palatable because, as we all well know, private industry is made on a bottom line. And if you keep taking away from the bottom line, you might have the most talented resource pool, but they won't come here. So if you could offer some insight in some of the dialogues that you've heard on the job creation tax cut and how it is a benefit to some of those private companies.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I appreciate this question. I've heard from many private sector investment proponents that a very competitive tax jurisdiction, a very competitive tax environment is critical to the greater value proposition. And we recognize that the greater value proposition includes, but is not exclusive to, our tax rates. But our business tax rates are critically important. And I also want to point out again that one of the most, I believe, lasting and durable positive changes we'll make to our business environment is modernizing our regulatory environment, reducing red tape. That is absolutely critical, and that's a key component, again, to Alberta's value proposition. I've tested our value proposition with capital investment specialists from actually across the continent, and the response I've had is that Alberta has an incredibly good story to tell around our business environment. Again, on our greater value proposition, but it's a story that is poorly understood, and that's one reason why we created Invest Alberta. Invest Alberta will have the job of ensuring that investment proponents across North America and in fact globally know the great value proposition that exists in Alberta. And that value proposition, of course, includes our very preferential business tax rates. It includes our advantageous cost of living. It also includes access to, again, world-class commercial space at very affordable rates. It includes a province that is incredibly livable. Obviously, cities like Calgary and Edmonton, but more than that, rural Alberta offers so much to so many. It includes a jurisdiction that's been blessed with abundant natural resources and very progressive, responsible players in that resource sector that are on a path of continual improvement in terms of environmental and social governance metrics. So we have an incredible story to tell. I'm getting very positive feedback. I think we're just starting to see what will become a wave of investment moving into the province of Alberta, and that's backed up by BMO forecasts of Alberta leading the nation in terms of economic growth in 2021.
I appreciate that, Minister. And back to the context, and for the folks at home that may not appreciate the order of magnitude. So again, as fiscal conservatives, it was, quite frankly, a bit of a train wreck, the fiscal program that we had in place, and the amount of people that were actually leaving the province when it came to that, the issues that were placed I'm trying not to say the wrong words or be politically correct here to a degree, but quite frankly, the area that was set up for them was not conducive to conducting business and making a go of it in some of the sectors. So we saw that flight of capital. But with the $18 billion here, and if we're looking at interest rates, can you advise of how much of our annual income, if you would, the cash revenue actually goes towards debt servicing versus going into some of the other ministries?
Well, right now we're projecting $2.8 billion for debt service costs for the upcoming year. That's rising to over $3.3 billion in the out year by 23-24. So that's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7% of government revenues, which is not insignificant. Fortunately, relative to many other provinces, our debt service costs are still lower. And in fact, when we've developed the metric of our per capita cost of delivering government services, and as we compare to other provinces, we've removed debt servicing costs because those are not program costs. So it's critical that we continue to ensure that we have a relatively strong balance sheet, hence the fiscal anchor of net debt to GDP below 30%. But in spite of that, we will see debt service costs take an increasing amount of government revenues. That's why it will be so important to get to balance and define a path to balance and timeline as soon as we have economic clarity post-pandemic.
I appreciate that, Minister. And I would like to give you some words of encouragement. So if you can recall back last fall when you were out in God's country out in our area, we had our town hall at the Villeneuve Airport. And one of the ladies came forward and said that she was glad that you had your hand on the rudder. And she was very glad that you were hired for the job that you're doing to navigate through these tough times and challenging times. So, in her words, make sure you get the job done, Minister. We're behind you. And I am as well, sir. So with that, I would like to cede my time over to the MLA from Calgary East, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Minister. I appreciate the works that the Minister and all the staff of the ministry for the responsible financial management and budget planning towards economic stability for Alberta. And as mentioned on page 110 of the business plan under key objective 3.3, my question is, what is the ministry doing to provide responsible, efficient leadership when it comes to board governance and evidence-based recruitment of qualified candidates for public agencies?
Well, that's a great question because there's 247 public agencies across government. They actually account for almost 50% of the province's budget. So the efficient operation of those public agencies is critical to ensure that taxpayers in this province are getting good value, to ensure that Albertans are well served by their programs. A critical component of our agencies, boards, and committees in this province is to ensure that we're constantly reviewing their mandate and ensuring that they're delivering effectively on that mandate. It's also important to ensure that we don't have redundancies. At times, organization objectives can change over time. Sometimes the needs change within the province. And so it's important that we're constantly reviewing mandates and the ability of organizations to deliver on the mandate and ensuring that we don't have redundancy across government. And so that's why we've taken on this review of the organizations. Part of the review has been to ensure that we have appropriate governance in our agency boards and commissions, and that every agency, board, or commission has the appropriate leadership, and that is the appropriate board leadership. And so part of this effort was involved centralizing our recruitment process for directors on our agencies, boards, and commissions. By centralizing that function, we've found efficiencies, and it's actually also resulted, I believe, in ensuring that we can have the best candidates, board members with the appropriate skill set and experience to ensure competencies.
Thank you, Minister, and I hesitate to interrupt again, but we will have a quick 5-minute health break followed by a 10-minute rotation with the official opposition. So please be back in your chairs in 5 minutes. in line, everyone. Please take your seats. We will proceed with 5 and 5 with the official opposition again.
Yes, please.
Okay, and who is your speaker? Ms. Gray, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Minister, in our last opportunity to ask questions, we were just talking about public sector bargaining. I would just like to remind anyone who is currently watching this estimates process that we are talking about the workers and the families that have been keeping us running through the pandemic. We're talking about the healthcare heroes, not just those with the medical training, but everybody who's part of our system, from the people working in laundry and food services, porters, up through to the nurses and healthcare aides and others, as well as other workers all around our province. So I would like to ask you again, just around, have you been briefed when you are looking at how you're going to be moving forward with various bargaining models? Are you considering or have you been briefed on the constitutionality of imposing arbitration processes or otherwise truncating bargaining? And without going into too much detail, please, yes or no answer would suffice if you are considering the issues of constitutionality as you look forward into bargaining.
Again, my answer will be the same. We're focused on a successful negotiated outcome. And I absolutely recognize the great contribution that so many have made in the public sector over the last number of months, and in many cases in difficult circumstances. And that's one reason why we were really pleased to roll out the Critical Worker Benefit Program. That would at least provide some token of appreciation to all those on the front line, certainly in healthcare. And that does include absolutely those in laundry and cleaning and food service, every frontline worker, as well as those in the private sector who worked in the transportation and food service line.
Thank you very much, Minister. I appreciate that I won't be getting an answer to my question. And with that, I would like to cede the remainder of my time to my colleague, MLA Hoffman, if that would be acceptable to her. Apologies for...
Nope, that's fine. I got my notes. Thank you so much, Minister and member. Can we get a time check?
You have 7 minutes, 32 seconds.
Fantastic. So I want to start by talking about one of the things I like to do is go through the business plans. I feel like they're a covenant with the people of Alberta around what we as the board responsible for their resources are allocating those. And when I went through the business plans this year, one of the big things that stood out to me is how much shorter they are than what they've been in past years. Education, I think, was 13 and is 4 now. I think health was 11 and is 3. So I'd like to have some clarification because it seems, and I think it was actually said in health estimates earlier, that there was direction from Treasury, Board and Finance to reduce the actual business plans for each individual ministry. Can you confirm that that is indeed the case?
Yes, we have provided direction to ensure that our objectives and business plans are concise, that they're very readable for all Albertans, and that they're measurable. And we're committed to continuous improvement in business planning and reporting, and to better integrate financial, non-financial results by relating costs to the results achieved and explaining the links between spending and outcomes, objectives, and initiatives. So they've been streamlined to be more targeted.
Agree that they are much, much shorter. I guess one of my concerns is that when whole sections around Indigenous health outcomes are removed, or whole sections around safe, caring, and inclusive working and learning environments for students are removed, it says that it's not part of the commitment that's being made by government to the people of Alberta that those are priorities, because they're not going to be measured and they're not objectives that have been highlighted in the budget this year any longer. So I think that it's incredibly short-sighted, and I think it could really harm some of the trust that the government is asking Albertans to put in them through their budget process. I think that happy to hear your response to taking those items out specifically or in general to reducing it by such a large, like it's about 25% of what it used to be in those two ministries. Health alone is over $20 billion. I don't think as a shareholder in a corporation, a $20 billion a year corporation, that shareholders would be fine with a 3-page summary of what the objectives are for the corporation. I think that they would want far greater accountability and transparency for their investment and their outcomes.
Well, again, Chair, we're focused on streamlining these reports so they include measurable, relevant information that better conveys information that can be presented clearly to Albertans. And the new business plan also ensures a greater emphasis on performance measures, indicators, and targets to support accountability and annual reporting on government's priorities, which also helps drive change and continuous improvement in performance. Again, we believe this streamlined approach, efficient approach, will actually result in better outcomes than a lot more complexity and volume.
So I would just add to that I think that the objective around Indigenous life expectancy being a measurable target, how long Indigenous Albertans are living for, what infant mortality rates are for Indigenous and non-Indigenous Albertans. I think that's absolutely measurable, and I think it's very easy to track and to report on that. And the fact that a number of these measurable targets have been taken out, I think does not bode well for government in a number of areas, including safe and caring schools, for example. There has always been surveys, it's always been tracked, it's always been measured, and now it's taken out as being one of the measures and objectives for this upcoming school year. So I think that it doesn't, I understand that you're saying you want it shorter, you want it more succinct, but I think it actually takes away a lot of transparency and accountability when government works so aggressively to downsize their accountability measures to the people of Alberta. And in turn, I would say to the Auditor General, because the Auditor General measures success against business plans and how our annual reports line up with that. So I know that the government was recognized by the media as being secretive, and I had hoped that that wasn't going to be, that there would be more transparency and accountability through the budget process. I think a $20 billion health budget deserves more than a 3-page business plan. Maybe we disagree.
Well, again, I believe there's accountability and transparency in simplicity very often, in a lack of complexity. And that's our approach. We obviously didn't write Health's business plan. That was Health's decision. But in general terms, the direction we set was to ensure our business plans are concise, they're focused, they're measurable. And I believe that will result in additional transparency to Albertans.
They specifically told us that they were directed to cut it substantially and that they were following direction from Treasury Board and Finance. So are you saying that they could have had an 11-page business plan and that they chose to go down to 3, or that it was direction to become so much more concise?
No, what I'm saying is, in terms of the metrics that Health included, that was Health's decision. I'm absolutely saying that that Treasury Board did direct departments to concisely deliver objectives and ensure that we are transparent, concise, again, focused, and measured.
Okay. Well, lastly, I'll say on that, and then I'd like to go on to some insurance matters again, is that I do think that accountability around setting priorities around infant mortality for Indigenous Albertans or life expectancy is something that we should be holding ourselves accountable for, and that we should be putting those as targets that we are going to enact policies to improve those outcomes. And by taking out any measure, it definitely doesn't say that it's a priority or a target. In terms of insurance, I wanted to touch on school bus insurance, because we've seen reports of school bus insurance going up over 300%. I think the one that I received from Southern Alberta was 320%. So, Minister, you've talked generally about insurance, and I know you've wanted to touch on condos. I specifically want to ask about school bus insurance and liabilities as it relates to school buses, because of course we need to get kids to school, and that needs to be done in an affordable way. So is there anything in this budget that will address the huge spikes in school bus insurance?
So with respect to school bus insurance, one thing I want to point out is that the rate cap only applied to private passenger vehicles. It didn't apply to commercial vehicles or fleet insurance. So, so the rate cap did not apply. There were no changes there. Of course, there has been pressure on automobile insurance premiums, and that's again why we brought in Bill 41 and the related regulatory changes. We needed to do something tangible, not just patch a problem up that would just lead to other unintended consequences. We brought in fundamental changes, real changes in Bill 41 and the related regulatory changes that will result in reduced premiums.
Again, I apologize for interrupting. We will now move on to, again, 5 and 5 with the Government Caucus. And Mr. Singh, I believe you had the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. I have similar question to my previous question as well. As mentioned on page 110 of the business plan, under key objectives 3.3, how is the ministry working with public agencies to be able to provide proper resources and advice on board governance and evidence-based recruitment?
Well, good, Chair. That's a very good question, and particularly in light of the fact that public agencies deliver such a significant portion of government programs and affect such a significant portion of our budget. So to support governance excellence for Alberta's public agencies, the government has updated and further developed governance policies, best practices and implementation, as well as provides advice which supports all public agencies to be effective and accountable to Albertans. The policy was updated to align with current legislation, facilitate and inform governance best practices, and clarify accountability and oversight for public agencies. The policy and requirements are further clarified based on leading practices and research, and reinforces government's commitment to strengthening governance excellence for all agencies, boards, and commissions by increasing governance literacy across agencies and departments. And this specifically includes providing clear information, direction, and best practices, support for competency-based recruitment, and clarifies roles and responsibilities and accountability. I do want to make a couple of comments on centralized recruitment, because I really believe ensuring that you have the right individuals around the board, the right individuals leading these organizations is critical to accountability, to efficiency, and to ensure that they deliver on their mandate. When we took office, it was very clear that a number of these boards had individuals serving on the board that, I'm sure in their own right, had a significant skill set, but their skill set in many cases just was not aligned to the skills and competency matrix that was required by these agencies. And so that's one reason, again, why we moved to centralized recruitment, to ensure that we had a very efficient recruitment process to where we could appoint individuals that had the appropriate skills, the appropriate experience, to deliver the mandates of those organizations.
And how is the minister and ministry ensuring that this support does promote accountability, efficiency, and effectiveness in public agencies?
Well, and that's another good question. Annual reviews are critically important for these agencies, government agencies, and and periodically we should be undergoing very, very significant reviews of our agencies. And I can point to the performance review that the Minister of Health initiated with AHS as an example of the type of in-depth review that's periodically required to ensure that agencies are delivering most efficiently and effectively and delivering on their mandate. It's critically important as well with a number of these agencies, with many agencies, to determine that the programs they're delivering are still needed by the province of Alberta. I think all of us can probably point to perhaps an organization that delivered programs well past its mandate. Sometimes it's much easier to create an organization than, in fact, to dissolve one, and I've certainly seen that. That's why the review process is critically important.
Once again, thank you, Minister, for answering my questions and for all the efforts to ensure accountability, efficient, effective public agencies under the ministry. And I will turn over to MLA Lewin.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Minister, again. I want to, I guess, dive right into something here. On page 217 of the government estimates document, line item 12.2 shows an increase in operating expense for the horse racing and breeding renewal program. And I understand this is a program that's been going on for some time now through multiple governments. And I just wanted to see if you could explain to the committee here the change in operating expenses from 2019-20 to 2020 to 21. So obviously a change there. Seems like a drop in operating expenses. And just wonder if you give an explanation for that. And then I'm not sure if there's any other information you can provide on what some of these funds are used for too. So.
Sure. I'm happy to provide additional information around the horse racing and breeding renewal program. Of course, that does involve horse racing Alberta, and so we can see that in 2019-20 there was amounts paid out to horse racing to HRA of $35 million, and I think it's important for members to know that this really consists of a portion of the gambling proceeds, slot machine proceeds at racing entertainment centers across the province. And so there have been a couple of changes, but as you can see, we were budgeting $38 million for 2020, 2021, and in fact, in our actual forecast is only going to be it's going to be just under $30 million, and that's due to decreased activity at these venues due to public health restrictions and the pandemic. One change that we've made in the current year is we've changed the funding agreement. We've amended the funding agreement. Previously, a number of years ago, Horse Racing Alberta received 51.66% of gaming revenues. And the previous government reduced that amount to 40% over time. 40% just simply wasn't sustainable to support the horse breeding programs and to support the industry. And we were in fact seeing a reduction in the size of the industry. We were seeing a reduction in industry activity. And in fact, some of our breeders were moving out of the province, moving to other jurisdictions. And so what we did this last year is we increased the funding percentage from 40 to 50% for Horse Racing Alberta to ensure that the industry is adequately funded so they can continue forward with a world-class breeding program to ensure that industry participants can have a future in the province of Alberta. Again, unfortunately, COVID got in the way, and it reduced revenues, again, just due to a decreased activity. But we are forecasting a recovery in the upcoming year. You can see that we're forecasting just over $37 million under the new funding formula to be allocated to Horse Racing Alberta, and down the road we would project that amount will increase.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. And you basically answered my next question, which is the estimated cost of $38.8 million looking at in 21-22. And obviously you've explained that to us very well, so appreciate that. And I appreciate the information too on where that money comes from and why it's directed right back there. So I think that's a great explanation for us here today. So I'll cede my time now to MLA Turton.
And you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Minister, for again being here. So obviously I'm not going to have a chance by the time I get through my question to be able to hear the complete response. So I'll start prefacing my question now, and then we'll continue the conversation in the next block. But my question is really regarding on page 216 of the government estimates. It really talks about the public agency secretariat. And for the countless individuals online that are watching this, I'm sure there is many of tens perhaps taking part in today's discussion. I mean, the public agency secretariat really has four primary functions, and really my question is going to be pertaining to that. So number one, the first function obviously is to coordinate the centralized recruitment function for appointments to the ABCs here in the province of Alberta. It also provides assistance, tools and advice to departments and public agencies to outline the best practices in public agency governance and legislative requirements. And as well as the third one is obviously, as you know, is to develop and implement consistent compensation frameworks for designated public agencies, and also provides information to Albertans to increase public awareness about the role of public agencies and the value of serving on a public agency. So my question is, obviously, going through the budget, is that there was line item 10.5. It shows an increase in the operating expenses for this important.
Sorry to interrupt, as usual, but we will now move on to a 10-minute block, or 5 and 5. I assume that you want to continue with that. So go ahead, Ms. Phillips. I believe you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to get back to a couple of things on gaming. I'm happy to be corrected on this, Minister. There's a lot of documents in front of me, but I seem to remember there were projections on online gaming revenue projections before at some point. I don't know if it was just in the media or if it was in last year's budget. And I'm wondering if you can confirm what those projections are, direct me in the fiscal plan if they are there, and if not, if you can disaggregate them out of the page 89 revenue from other sources.
Chair, thank you. Thank the member for that question. We will disaggregate those. I don't have that information in front of me, but we will disaggregate that and provide that information to the member.
So, Minister, I just want to kind of go off memory here, and it was a couple $100 million, as I recall, but there was some phase-in and there were some costs too to set it up, right? And so I just want to confirm, though, my understanding that the AGLC gaming lottery revenue from other sources in the fiscal plan on page 89, that includes the online, whatever those revenues are. My memory is fuzzy on that one. It does?
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Is there any change here? And this is just an item of pure technical, me being able to read what the changes were from the dissolution of the lottery fund, Minister. So is there any difference here on like the AGLC gaming / lottery when the lottery fund when it goes into GRF now, but it was just from what they call electronic, a casino activity. Am I correct in that? Or explain to me what was the gaming and what was coming out of the lottery fund? Like what activities on the casino floor were affected by that?
In terms of removing the lottery fund, there was nothing affected in terms of actual function.
I know, but my question is what was going into the lottery fund? It was VLTs. Can you walk me through the types of activities and types of casino activities that was going into that?
Chair, if I can, I think we would all benefit from AGLC's representative. Candace is prepared to make some comments there. I think that would be appropriate.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Minister. Regarding the Alberta Lottery Fund, it was certainly a portion of slot machine proceeds and VLT proceeds that flowed into the Alberta Lottery Fund. And those funds are still distributed as outlined in the report. So it was only an administrative change to the Alberta Lottery Fund.
So I guess my question here is, so in the revenue on page 89, we used to have other revenue pieces as well that said, oh, okay, there was 1.4 billion, or it was a little bit north of 1.4 billion in 18 and 19 that was transferred at AGLC into the lottery fund. I think in 18, according to the AGLC, financial information, it was 1.417, and in 19 it was 1.453. So this line on page 89 of the fiscal plan is the same. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm getting apples to apples on what the revenues are. These plus the online is what I'm to understand.
There we go. All right. So our AGLC gaming and lottery revenue line, as on page 89, includes all total gaming and lottery revenue. And that also includes the online component.
Okay, so can I have that disaggregated with the, I think there's some transfers from Western Canada Lottery, and just to make sure that I have confirmed my understanding of what is in that revenue. Because what's curious to me is, I mean, we all understand that the 21-22 estimates are going to be lower, than 18-19. That stands to reason. I mean, we obviously understand that the forecast at 869 for the last fiscal year, obviously, because of the pandemic. But what I don't understand is that this is the whole rolled up number, including online, but it's less than what was coming out of lottery fund transfers, like, for a couple of years, or it's about the same that was coming out in 18-19. Why no real? Why is that just staying static? I guess when you're adding new activities and aggregating more things in.
Well, I'll certainly be pleased to have AGLC comment, but here's the reality for 21-22. We are still, right now, we have public health measures that are affecting our casinos and gaming venues. And we don't know how much longer those public restrictions will remain. And so no doubt AGLC has taken that into consideration, and our department has taken that into consideration.
For sure. So, Minister, I understand that. That's why it's 1.2, right? And we all understand that. But then the target for 22 and the target for 23 is essentially what it was in 2018. And that part, but it includes more sources of revenue. So I don't really understand what is keeping that revenue line the status quo, when one would think with the proliferation of online gaming and bringing in and counting of other revenue sources that it would go up at least a little bit.
Sure, and it is going up a little bit, but it's going up gradually. And again, we believe these are very realistic projections. The online gaming, we do have our projections, and it's 150 million, projected to be 150 million over, I believe, 5 years. And so that's not going to be a super significant number relative to the whole. And I think we need to also recognize that the gaming market in Alberta is a mature market. And so it's not going to experience massive growth year over year. We can see that we are expecting this sector to recover, and it will recover from what was budgeted at just under 1.4 billion to just under 1.5 billion in 23-24.
So, Minister, I have here a stack of lobbyist registration records that Nick Coolsburn, the close friend of the Premier, has been lobbying for changes to casino revenues and the revenue sharing model for charities for months. So he is registered to lobby for helping a casino seek a more equitable share of the monetary split of gaming revenue. He also has been raising with the Minister's office for months now the risks of having charities volunteer. Sorry.
Member, point of order has been called, and I don't believe I even have to listen to it. I think I will rule in favor of the point of order. I think it's a little bit, I think you're kind of crossing the line here with bringing up people that aren't here in the room to stand up for themselves or to defend themselves. So, member, if you persist with that line of questioning, I'll have to call you to order.
I will rephrase.
Thank you.
There is a charitable gaming review happening. The minister affirmed that for the people of Alberta before question period. And there is considerable evidence that people are asking for changes to so that casinos can have a more, quote, equitable share of the monetary split of gaming revenue. And
Again.
Go ahead, Mr. Lowen.
Yeah, point of order under 23B. Again, it doesn't seem like the member's talking about the estimates at hand here. I haven't seen any relative discussion to that point yet. She seems to be talking about different discussions happening in the legislature and elsewhere, but not the actual estimates that we're discussing here today. So I just asked that we get her back on track as far as talking about estimates.
Okay, thank you. We'll continue with the point of order. Go ahead, Ms. Gray.
Thank you. On my colleague's behalf, she listed page 89 of the fiscal plan, AGLC, where all of the revenue from other sources, that table is there. Plans for that revenue is directly related to budget 2021 to 24, as well as the minister's intentions. I would argue this is directly related, and I appreciate that the minister listed the page before she began this line of questioning.
The member, not the minister, but
oh,
thank you. And I'll refer back to my original ruling on the last point of order that was brought up, and I did agree with that, and I ruled accordingly to leave individuals out of the questioning. But I do believe that the line of questioning does follow a line item or a page in the fiscal plan. So I will leave it up to the minister when we get back to questions from the official opposition, whether he would like to answer that, as long as the member continues on a path that is acceptable to the chair. All right? Is everybody okay with that? Thank you very much. We'll now move on to 5 minutes and 5 minutes with the government caucus. Go ahead, Mr. Turton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to kind of continue along my question, obviously I feel an appropriate description of the actual program that I'm going to be talking about, but just to repeat the question for the minister's benefit. So regarding on page 216 of the government estimates, line item 10.5 shows an increase in operating expenses for strategic services and the public agency secretariat than last year's forecasted costs. Minister, can you please explain this change and what this means for operations in strategic services and the public agency secretariat?
Sure, good. Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to answer that question. What happened, the dynamic that was taking place was in fact in 2021, the Public Service Commission was in fact managing some vacancies at that point in time. So they were actually underexpended on that line item. If we would take a look in 21-22, so for the upcoming year, the budget is actually decreasing by approximately $1.5 million relative to the previous budget, the 2020-21 budget. The actual results for 2021, in fact, came in significantly under budget again because the Public Service Commission was managing some vacancies throughout the year.
And so given, just a quick supplemental, is that given your comments, I mean, is it your expectation that the trend lines that we have experienced this last year will continue, or do you think that they will either adapt one way or the other in upcoming future years?
Well, our expectation would align with the projections we made in the budget. So we are expecting, in fact, we're budgeting for a $1.5 million savings from the previous year. But we are expecting that our 21-22 costs will be higher than the actual costs in 2021.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for the answer, Minister. At this point, I would like to cede my time over to MLA Guthrie. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, item number 9 on page 216 of the government estimates shows operating expenses for corporate planning and red tape, seeing a decrease from 3.48 million forecasted in 2021 to an estimated 2.43 million in 2021-2022. So could the minister speak to this reduction?
Sure, Chair, happy to. And this reduction does not demonstrate any diminished focus on red tape reduction. Our focus on regulatory modernization and red tape reduction is absolutely as strong now. In fact, I would suggest even stronger now that we're really focused on economic recovery than it was in the past. The reason for the reduction is the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction found that the advice and expertise of industry panels was very, very sufficient, in fact, exceeded expectations. And so it resulted in less dependence on external third-party contracts, fee-for-service contracts. So again, it's going to be a cost savings, which is very welcome, of course, at a time like this, but it will not result in diminished advice, in diminished analysis, and in diminished recommendations on red tape reduction and regulatory modernization.
As you had referenced earlier today, we had in Alberta moved from an F to an A-, I believe, now as far as red tape and red tape reduction, and that represents a tremendous amount of effort on this government's part. Are there successes, is the success of the reduction in red tape showing up in savings, and do you see further reductions coming?
Well, the answer is yes. This is a work in progress. And we are seeing the effects of our regulatory modernization, red tape reduction efforts. Earlier, I noted a couple of examples. Certainly, there's that great example at AGLC, which is just one of hundreds and hundreds of examples of red tape reduction. But this remains a work in progress. We've got a lot of work to do because, as you point out, sorry, Chair, as the member pointed out, we inherited an F. We actually have a straight A right now. And not only do we want to hold on to the rating in itself isn't important. What really matters is, in fact, that we are reducing red tape regulatory burden for Albertans and for Alberta businesses, for other Alberta entities, both nonprofit entities, even government organizations, so that we can operate most efficiently and so that we can ensure a significant economic recovery, which is critical to job creation and also critical to expanded fiscal capacity, which will be critical to increase government revenues.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks for the correction there too. Earlier today, there was, we were talking about the long-term debt, and so I went and looked up Alberta's long-term debt issues, and I see that borrowing rates at least have been very good through COVID. And how I know it was difficult there for a while, but how has the availability of cash been in the marketplace, and and what do you expect going forward?
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you through the Chair to that question. A very pertinent question. We had a rough couple of weeks, as I think every jurisdiction did, every province did across the country back in March, in terms of capital markets were effectively frozen, and so fortunately we had a thaw, and we got back on the market, and we have an excellent team here at Treasury Board and Finance. I've been very impressed with their competence, their connectedness, and their the way they performed in what was a very difficult period of time last spring. So what happened as capital markets thawed? We got back on the market. We've been able to issue bonds. We've been able to borrow effectively. Since then, our cost of capital has been low, which has been truly favorable as we've had to be on the markets borrowing larger sums than we would have otherwise had to, again, because of the pandemic. We've seen our cost of capital inch up recently, and yet we're still borrowing at favorable levels. But we know we can't take that for granted forever. And again, that's why as quickly as possible, as expeditiously as possible, as soon as we have economic clarity, we will provide a path and timeline to balance. That's going to be essential in order to ensure that we're on a sustainable fiscal trajectory, and to ensure that we can maximize revenues for program spending as opposed to debt service costs.
When you were speaking to MLA Getson, you had mentioned inflationary pressures. I know it's not something that we've seen in quite some time. There's been stimulus packages that are being put out across Canada, the U.S., around the world. The U.S. just approved a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. It makes me curious, though, about the possibility of inflationary pressures as the supply becomes greater. What are your thoughts on that, on inflationary pressures and in the near term, and how that might affect borrowing rates?
Well, obviously, if inflation rises significantly, it could affect decisions of central banks, and we could see rates increase. I think we are seeing some creep already in the trade, in the market. But really, we're looking to manage what we can manage right now. We live in a world of many uncertainties, and that's why Budget 2021 is focused on managing funding health adequately for the pandemic, positioning the province for economic recovery, and also positioning the province for fiscal sustainability by ensuring that we keep a strong balance sheet.
Thank you very much, Minister. And again, I hesitate to interrupt. We will now move on to the official opposition, but if we're going to proceed with the member opposite, I would just like to, before we begin, refer to Section 23 in the standing orders. A member will be called to order by the Speaker if, in the Speaker's opinion, that member, and it goes on. So I think that line of questioning is getting very close to imputing false motives. So I would just caution the member to proceed. I'll allow the question, but please be cautious.
Thank you. So in the course of my duties as the finance critic, I've been contacted by a number of people who rely on casinos or other charitable gaming activities to fund their operations. And they have significant concerns, as we talked about this morning, related to the charitable gaming review. Among those concerns are anticipated changes to potentially pooling agreements, the 3 months pooled funds arrangements, the 50% of profits from slot machines that are operated in the casinos for that 3-month period. And so charities and nonprofits of all kinds are looking for reassurances that they will not see an effect on their bottom line and the type of funding that they get. And I would like to provide the Minister one more opportunity to give those assurances to all of those people who volunteer at those casinos. On the other side, we have seen industry saying that there are issues related to the distribution of charitable gaming proceeds from charitable casino events, and that there are also concerns from the industry related to an equitable share of the monetary split of gaming revenue. And they've also raised some concerns about the risks of having charities volunteering in those casinos. So I would like to give the Minister a chance to respond to whether he thinks that the industry concerns have merit, and whether he is willing to extend the assurances that I asked for on behalf of so many nonprofits that have reached out to me as a result of this gaming review.
Well, thank you, Chair. The gaming review is not considering changes to the funding model, and I think that's very important right now. It is focused on wait times. It's focused on the use of proceeds, on eligibility. It's focused on location disparities. I certainly hear concerns around that, and I think some of them are legitimate. And it's focused on process. But again, it's not considering the funding model.
Okay. I'd like to pass my time over to Member Hoffman now.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, sorry, member, I was thinking, Mr. Chair, and colleagues for this opportunity. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about communications, which I note is on your Treasury Board business plan, delivering the effective, efficient communications between Albertans and the Government of Alberta. And I can't help but think of one of the modes of communication that I often hear from particularly parents in the disability community who feel targeted and harassed by issues managers in the Government of Alberta. So I was trying to look into more things that the issue managers do in addition to their engagement on Twitter with parents who are talking about their experiences and fighting for their children. And I specifically, we initiated a FOIP for issue manager agendas for their calendars. And there was one that came back that I'm going to highlight right now. It's from Mr. Bateson, and it's from January until the middle of May 21st. And I think there are two actual meetings in it. One is around FOIP and records management, teleconference to discuss FOIP and document management, and then another one around economic recovery plan. But the rest is just check stats can or canceled meetings or nothing at all. So I would say in terms of communications with Albertans, the examples I've seen coming out of that office most publicly, I don't think meet the goals that you've outlined in your business plan. So I'd be happy to hear either if the minister condones that behavior or if there are other things that are going to be done to ensure that the communications is effective and efficient as outlined in the business plan.
All right. Well, firstly, issue managers are not under CPE. They're not under this ministry. They would be under the ministry offices.
Okay. So you want me to ask the Minister of Environment about Mr. Bateson's conduct and if it meets with the PMSEO as is outlined in his contract, which I believe is related back to public relations.
I think the affected or relevant departments would be the Premier's office or Exec Council, but this isn't a CPE issue, and so, Chair, I don't see this as relevant to this discussion.
Okay. There are also references in the business plan about value for dollar around public investment. I imagine the target of some of these objectives is around public sector compensation and the public service at large, but this is a Government of Alberta employee who has 2 meetings over 5 months. Is that acceptable to the minister that there would be employees being paid under his budget that have literally 2 meetings in 5.5 months or 4.5 months, I guess it is?
Chair, I don't have the details of that allegation or assertion, so I can't comment on that.
I'll be happy to table them in the legislature tomorrow, consistent with the standing orders. And if the minister wants to respond in writing, that would be fantastic, I think. And I'm happy to go to another topic.
Yeah, and thank you, and Minister, just to assure you that you are, you have the ability to, or under no obligation to answer a question you don't have the information on, so please carry on.
But I'm happy to make sure the information's tabled tomorrow and await a response. I think that would be fair and appropriate, and certainly the moms specifically who have expressed concerns about this, I think would appreciate the government taking their concerns seriously. I do want to touch a little bit on fees, and they are up significantly. If I look to the fiscal plan, page 175, premiums, fees, and licenses, post-secondary institution fees is probably the largest grab and an area where fees are being increased, but there's also health / school board fees and charges, and motor vehicle licenses are all projected to go up in this budget. Did the minister, how does this align with your priorities around restraint for Albertans when you're asking Albertans to pay considerably more in fees in this upcoming fiscal year?
So as I take a look at page 175, we see, I would say, a very modest increase in post-secondary institution fees, budget year 2020-21 versus budget 21-22, very modest, of 15 million on a almost a $1.5 billion budget line. And if we take a look actually at health and school board fees and charges, they're going down.
That?
So,
sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I know the minister just referenced budget versus estimate, but I'm talking about the actual money that people paid in fees, so the forecast versus the estimate.
So, of course, the fact that we've been in a pandemic, that behavior has been significantly affected, has resulted in lower fees almost across the board. And when I take a look at health and school board fees, I believe those would include parking. I know parking fees were suspended for a period of time by Alberta Health, just in recognition of the challenges around COVID. So, and again, we know that in terms of regular behavior was affected, particularly around health, but really across the board. And so I would suggest to the member chair that that's a very poor comparison. I think it's a much more relevant comparison is to take a look at budget year over year. And I think the member would conclude that when we look at budget year over year, we're actually seeing a reduction in fees, not an increase.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The budget was passed at the beginning, actually before there was a public health emergency. Well, maybe it was passed after there was a public health emergency, but it was written before there was a public health emergency. So I think to say that we can compare a budget that was based on assumptions a year prior, before we lived through the impacts of COVID, I think is not reflective of the reality of Albertans and what they've gone through over this last year. I think that what has actually been spent and what we're asking people to spend next year is a far more fair comparator, especially while we're still in the midst of COVID and responding to its impacts. So I would say also increasing post-secondary tuition and getting rid of the tax credit, I think, is another grab at folks who were doing everything they could to live within their means and provide an opportunity for themselves to pursue higher education and in turn be able to support their families.
Thank you, member. We will now move on to a 10-minute segment for the government caucus. I assume you want to go back and forth with the minister. And Mr. Yassin, have you got the floor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. My question is on debt servicing on page 219. And I think Mr. Gatson made a very eloquent observation on that as well. You know, if there was one wish for me in this budget, I didn't want to see these two lines there on page 219 under debt servicing. We could have used this money, you know, more meaningfully for our communities, businesses, schools, and even in this pandemic. But anyways, we have to deal with what we have to deal with. And I thank you, Minister, for your efforts to reduce the deficit and move towards balance. My question in reference to page 219 of the government estimate is, can you please describe to the committee the amount of debt servicing that Albertans have had shouldered in the past few years, and the last opportunities we have seen from uncontrollable spending that could have otherwise helped the province during this pandemic?
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you to the member for the question. As I mentioned earlier, for every dollar of debt servicing, we lose a dollar for program spending, or we have to raise an additional dollar from Albertans. And so that's the reality, and that's why it was so important to our government to actually present a balanced budget and get to balance in our first term. Again, unfortunately, COVID has necessarily delayed that goal, but it hasn't diminished the importance of getting to balance. In previous years, our debt service costs were just under the $2 billion mark, and we're projecting those to increase to $2.4 billion in the current year that we're in, and again, this will increase to close to $2.8 billion in our upcoming budgeted year. And one can see how quickly debt service costs can increase when we're in an environment like we're in. And it's fortunate that we're in a low interest rate environment, or we would be dealing with a bigger problem than we have today. Again, what's going to be very important is we stick to our plan. It's going to be important that we keep our net debt to GDP ratio below 30%. It's going to be very, very important that we, in fact, deliver on aligning our government, the cost of delivering government services with that of comparative provinces. We inherited a spending trajectory that was increasing 4% per year. And that was unacceptable at a time when revenues were flat. And that was also unacceptable when the Alberta government was spending over $10 billion more per year on a per capita basis than that of comparator provinces. And again, that's what really informed our budget and fiscal plan of 2019, and that fact and the objective of ensuring that debt service costs don't overwhelm us is also informing budget 2021.
Thank you, Minister. My second question, with debt servicing leading to sunk cost for our province, can you please speak to the ministry's effort in lowering our government debt to ensure that we can pivot some of that money towards more fruitful investments for this province?
Sure, and Chair, I probably answered part of that question. Yeah. But I really believe that it's important to Albertans to balance the budget. It's certainly important to our government. I remain convinced that Albertans, by and large, believe in the value of a balanced budget. I believe that most Albertans would find it really reprehensible to leave our excessive spending for the next generation. And again, that's why we've identified these fiscal anchors that will inform our fiscal decisions until we can lay out a path and timeline to balance. That's going to be critical. That's also why we are choosing our investments in strategic capital projects very carefully to ensure that those investments will in fact truly provide value for future generations of Albertans, both by replacing and building and caring for core infrastructure, but also by focusing on projects that will improve our productivity and competitiveness as a province, that will result in increased private sector attraction and job creation for Albertans and increased fiscal capacity in the future. And I can identify what those projects look like. If we take a look at the twinning of Highway 3, which is in this capital plan, that's a project that will ensure that we have adequate transportation infrastructure in a region where investment proponents, agriculture, manufacturing investment proponents have identified a lack as holding back investment. It's those kinds of projects that make good sense today And given our slack capacity in the economy, we can actually get a lot of that work done for 70 and 80 cents on the dollar and position the province for economic recovery.
Thank you, Minister, for your efforts and dedication towards this aspect of our budget. I really appreciate that. And now I will give my time to MLA Getson.
I appreciate that, MLA Yassine, and again, I think we're very much aligned when it comes to the issues of debt servicing, and with your lead into the capital plans, I know your background of working on the Mackenzie Valley Delta pipelines and working in that area. I'm sure that my next line of questioning to the Minister will be something else that you'll share as well. And Minister, with the capital plans, you know, as being a former major projects person working in those industries, both in Canada and the US, predominantly with linear projects of a number of years, but being a fiscal conservative, understanding that in our vein, we were elected to spend dollars prudently. And you had mentioned that through some of your contacts, the construction industry, they're bidding things at a really decent rate. But unlike some of the folks opposite, we don't just throw cash around and hopefully it's something sticks to the wall and generates revenue maybe sometime sort of down the road. So with that, the capital plan, it's key to the economic recovery. It's part of the strategy. And on page 128 of the fiscal plan, the total 3-year plan amounts to about, I believe it's $20.7 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And there's about $170 million increase from 21 until 22. Can you kind of give an idea of the first part of that is a breakdown on that funding? What is it going towards, sir?
Sure, and that's a great question. I'll hit a few highlights of the $20.7 billion capital plan. $5.9 billion is going to support municipal infrastructure, and of course that includes roads and wastewater, clean water infrastructure, and public transit. $3 billion is going towards capital maintenance and renewal, and in fact we increased the capital maintenance and renewal budget by $300 million. We really think at a time like this it's important to protect the assets that we already own. I know the Minister of Transportation is very keen on that objective to ensure that we can maintain our transportation system. It's much cheaper and more cost effective to maintain what you have than building from new. And it also will ensure that we're positioned well for economic recovery. And it has the added advantage of being able to ratchet that kind of work up quickly and put, again, thousands of Albertans to work at a time they really need a job. Some of the larger projects, of course, require a fair bit of front end work. Chair, as the member would know, require a fair bit of engineering and design. And so in order to responsibly initiate those, it can require a lead time of 9 months or a year. And that's why capital maintenance and renewal has been such an important part of our infrastructure and stimulus effort. $2.4 billion is invested in roads and bridges across the province. I think many will recognize that included in our capital plan is a bridge across the Peace River in northwestern Alberta. It will replace a ferry. Again, that has held back economic development up there. The residents are very keen on that effort, and in fact, it will be a toll bridge over time. The users of that bridge will actually pay for the infrastructure, and so that's really a win-win. But again, that project will also result in increased productivity and competitiveness, and I believe result in increased investment attraction in that region.
I appreciate that, Minister. And, I found it interesting last year that I was fortunate enough to have Motion 501, and Motion 501 was to, make a motion essentially to talk about trade, transportation, energy, utility corridors, both in the province and external, inclusive of rail projects.
Thank you, member. I hesitate to interrupt, but just at this point, I'd just like to caution all members that budget estimates is a place to get answers on the budget for Albertans and not to take personal shots and throw barbs at one another. So please, let's hesitate. We're almost done. We've got about 20 minutes left, so let's move on to the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that reminder to members. I want to talk a little bit about communications as it relates to government announcements and specifically this budget. I believe this morning it was confirmed that there both in this room and in the other room where health is being considered, that the announcement last Friday around surgical initiatives isn't actually in the health budget. That was definitely said very clearly in the estimates for health, that it was money that was planned to be spent out of the contingency fund, which I know is not part of health right now under its current allocations. But the minister was under the impression that it would absolutely be approved by Treasury Board and Finance. I believe in this room it was said that there weren't requests for that at this point, and of course I get why. If it's supposed to be contingency, it's supposed to be unplanned, and you haven't passed the budget yet, so how can you start dipping into contingency if you haven't actually approved the actual budget? So that being said, my question through the chair to the minister is around communications and being forthright with the information that's in the budget and being forthright with folks about how this is being financed or not financed at this point. And if the minister could respond to the fact that this money is not in the budget, but that, and probably with the support of communications professionals under the responsibility of the Minister of Finance, there have been significant announcements being made about money that's not actually budgeted at this time.
Well, in terms of health, again, we are permanently, certainly within the tenure of this fiscal plan, we are adding $900 million per year. And that funding will go to ensure that we can reduce our surgical wait times. It will also ensure that we can reduce our wait times for other procedures. Procedures and wait times lists that have grown during COVID. The $900 million will also ensure that that health can continue to function well, in light of the fact that a number of the Ernst & Young recommendations have been delayed in terms of implementation, and that has created some pressures within health. Obviously, we recognize the great importance of delivering excellent health care, and so that's also part of the reason why we're increasing our funding, base funding to health. As well, we're increasing our funding for home care, continuing care, to the tune of $200 million a year. And again, that's also included in the base budget increase of $900 million per year. The $1.25 billion contingency related to COVID has been established to adequately fund our healthcare system in light of the pandemic, recognizing that at this point in time, we don't know the duration of the pandemic, so consequently we don't know the resources that will be required to adequately deal with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Minister of Health was very clear that there wasn't money in the health budget for the initiatives that were announced on Friday around surgical wait times, that was going to be funded under COVID contingency funding, and that he was confident it would be approved by Treasury Board and Finance, and that's why they went forward with the announcement. So what the minister in this room is saying does not reflect what the Minister of Health said on the record a little after 11 this morning. It's definitely very counter to the assertions that were made just across the hall from here. So I would encourage both ministers to sort of sit down and clarify exactly how it is that they're going to deliver to things that aren't. The Minister of Health said it wasn't in his budget, that it was through the COVID contingency fund that these additional surgeries would be funded. And perhaps that's something that issue managers can be digging into and ensuring that they clarify that, because I think in terms of communicating something to the people of Alberta, implying that it's in the budget when the Minister of Health very clearly says it's not, is not effective communication. I don't think it's efficient, and I don't think it's fair. So will the minister confirm to report back to the House in some form around the lack of consistent information we're getting in these two rooms during simultaneous estimates debate?
Chair, I really don't have a response to the statement that the member made. Again, I won't reiterate my position, but the $900 million is designated for the priorities that I listed.
Yeah, Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister responsible for that budget doesn't believe that he can deliver the outcomes that he announced on Friday in that budget. So I definitely encourage you to confirm with him. I also want to take a few minutes to talk about AGLC from a slightly different angle. I appreciate, and I've had many school councils and community leagues reach out to me about their desire for some assurances that their funding won't go down because of lack of access to casinos, but also the other side of me reflects on my experiences in health and around addictions. And we know that particularly during times of crisis, including things like a shutdown or other stressful times in families' lives, that addictions are heightened. So I'm hoping that the minister or his through the chair, through the minister to AGLC, that they can talk about some of the initiatives that are going to address addictions before they are even further exacerbated.
Good. Well, thank you, Chair, and I'll certainly invite Candace to the podium to make a few comments from AGLC. But I absolutely concur that social responsibility is absolutely important, critically important, and AGLC, I believe, does a good job of including social responsibility mechanisms when they roll out gaming options for Albertans. I believe that's a critical component, and because we know that addictive behavior in the gambling sphere has a great social cost. We also know that gambling will take place whether it's offered by AGLC or not, and that's one reason why we moved forward with the online gaming model. Was to ensure that AGLC could roll out a very responsible version, with some very significant social responsibility protections, and ensure that the funding proceeds would be available to Albertans for health, for mental health, and to fund our social programs. But Chair, with your permission, I would invite Candace to make a few comments.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, AGLC has been reviewing all social responsibility programs and equally feels it's very important that we remain focused on these programs, particularly in light of COVID-19. And so we are currently running some new programs. Dry Days is one of those programs that's gained some considerable attention from Albertans, and it's resonated with them. We also have new campaigns coming out focused on game sense and a continued drink sense, and of course, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. In addition, as the Minister has already provided, our online gaming platform certainly focuses on the social responsibility lens and ensuring that gameplay is responsible, and there's significant measures built into the system to allow for responsible gambling. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And yeah, I would say that this is an area that I think a lot of folks have some concern on. And I would also say that there are a couple of other items that I imagine have already been addressed this morning. The increases, and they aren't AGLC, so feel free to sit down. They are items that are around the increases to personal income tax through de-indexing, a total of $600 million over the 3-year period. And definitely the fact that I appreciate that the minister backed off on the increase to education property tax for this year, but that he's planning on doing it in the next budget, I think is going to be of significant concern to Albertans. And finally, I just want to say that comparing a budget based on assumptions pre-pandemic to a budget now, I think that it absolutely makes sense that we look at the forecast. I think that that's the only fair and reasonable thing to do when the world has experienced such significant changes. And the minister himself last year said that he felt like Rome was burning behind him while he was delivering the budget. So why would we use that as the baseline when we're in very different territory today? So those are some of my final thoughts around the assumptions as they relate to Treasury Board and Finance. And I think it is about priorities. And when folks talk about not wanting to throw money at the wall and seeing if it sticks, I'd say a $1.5 at least billion bet on Donald Trump being reelected president was absolutely throwing money at the wall. And I think that's problematic.
We will now move on to a 10-minute rotation for the government caucus. And who I believe Mr.
I believe I'm
Mr. Getson, you still have
yeah.
the floor.
Yes, sir, appreciate
With-
that. Now,
With caution, sir.
oh, absolutely. I took that as the last member was speaking, had that same cautionary note, so I'll give her the same latitude, sir. Thank you. With the capital plan, Minister, if I could continue on with that. Again, we were talking about page 128, the $20.7 billion, the increase from 21 to 22. How does that capital plan compare to previous years? I think we got cut off at the last part there.
Well, we're increasing the capital spend for the upcoming year by $1.7 billion. So it's a significant increase. Again, I believe that it's a very warranted increase for two reasons, actually three reasons. One is right now, as we invest in strategic infrastructure, as we ensure that we're protecting the infrastructure the province already owns, we're able to put thousands of Albertans to work at a time they really need an opportunity. Secondly, we're getting great value right now. Again, based on my conversations with those in the construction business, we're likely getting a lot of this work done for 70 and 80 cents on the dollar. And thirdly, a number of our projects will in fact really position this province for economic recovery and growth. And I think that's a real priority right now when we're looking to create a business environment where we will attract a disproportionately investment into this province.
Oh, I appreciate that, sir. And again, the long-range strategy isn't just for, fixing the potholes, although we need to ensure that our roads are in good repair. I think we have the auspices of having the most paved miles per constituent in the province, and we've managed to maintain that for a number of years. But with that, that also comes the impetus to make sure that we are maintaining those and continuing on. And then the infrastructure growth that we have going forward facilitates, logistics, transport, and to continue in the economy. With that, though, however, in the capital plan, how many direct and indirect jobs do you propose that Budget 2021 is going to support and help facilitate?
Well, thank you, Chair. We are projecting that this capital plan over the 3 years will support 50,000 direct jobs and 40,000 indirect jobs. So this capital plan will provide significant opportunity for Alberta businesses, contractors, and maybe most importantly for Albertans that really need a job opportunity right now.
I appreciate that, sir. And if I could change gears a bit here, on pages 92 and 93 of the fiscal plan, alternate forecast scenario has been presented with respect to the key fiscal assumptions. And Minister, I'll give you a chance to flip your pages there. Really what I'm going to be talking about is the forecast in the West Texas Intermediate and what's been carried in the budget. So I guess the first question I'd ask, sir, is what assumptions did you take into account in the budget you proposed to us here?
Sure. We took, I think, what many would view as a cautious approach. I think it was a very responsible approach to our economic assumptions that informed our revenue projections. We're projecting revenues at, WTI prices at $46 for the upcoming year, and then moving to $54 and $55 in the out years. We're projecting a differential between Western Canadian Select and WTI at just over $14, increasing towards just over $15 in the out year. We're projecting a currency, and again, all of these variables are interrelated. We're projecting a currency of approximately 77 cents relative to its U.S. counterpart this year, moving up towards 79, closer to 80 by the end of our fiscal plan. Obviously, if we see continued strength in WTI prices, strength that we're seeing today, that will likely affect the differential, although we're experiencing a very narrow differential today, which is welcome. But no doubt it will result in a stronger Canadian currency, and we're seeing that on the ground today. The reality is we are still in a pandemic. There is still incredible economic uncertainty, and that's why in an effort to be transparent with Albertans, we provided obviously our base budget based on our economic assumptions, but both a low and a high scenario, so Albertans can understand what some different economic assumptions would look like with respect to fiscal outcomes.
I really appreciate that, Minister. And if WTI does remain above that $60 mark, is there anything in the bank? And again, not counting on fairy tales and pixie dust, and I appreciate you being conservative with your numbers. But if it does, what positive windfalls will we have, sir?
Well, in the event, we can take a look at the high scenario because my department has run these assumptions through their modeling. And under the high scenario, we would be looking at WTI at $55.50 for the upcoming fiscal year. That would result in increased revenues and a deficit of $15.4 billion. In the out years under the high scenario, we would be projecting WTI prices at $63 and then $64.50 in 23-24. In the out year, that would result in a budget deficit of a projected budget deficit of $3.4 billion. That would assume that we're holding expenses largely flat, which is what our fiscal plan calls for, and which will also ensure that we align with, on a per capita basis, costs of delivering government services with that of other provinces.
I appreciate that, sir. And with that, I'd like to cede it to my friend and neighbor to the south of me, Mr. MLA Cyril Turton, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have? 1 minute. We got 1 minute. Excellent. I was afraid my good friend was going to give me about 10 seconds to repay what or 4 seconds to do what I put. Yes. So, but anyways. But I obviously, Minister, thank you again very much. I know it's been a long day for you, and thank you so much for the answers. So to be real quick, many residents in Spruce Grove and Stony Plain are concerned about what's going to happen next over the next 12 months. It's been a crazy last year with COVID-19 and the pandemic. And so regarding the Alberta's recovery plan, what can you say in terms of, or I guess, do you anticipate any sort of transition when we move past the post-pandemic and move past that into future years as we get Alberta back on track?
Well, Chair, I will use these last few seconds to express my optimism in the future of this province. I truly believe our best days are ahead. And I believe as we position this province for disproportionate
Thank you,
economic
Minister.
recovery and growth.
And that was a great wrap-up. I apologize for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I would like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet in a half an hour at 7 p.m. to consider the estimates of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. For health reasons, please remember to take any drinks and other items with you as you leave. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.